Okay. Yeah, no, this is light. Okay, Mr. Jones.
First, you have budget amendment number 20. This is a reallocation of Title I funding. The budget was submitted by Dr. Park and approved by the Tennessee Department of Education. So if you have any detailed questions, Dr. Park is available.
So this is it was the 27,000 moved as a result of their request that we move it when we submitted Title I funds, or a new request of ours?
It would be a new request of ours.
It is. So we had some schools who had money allocated, so to say, for professional development, and they wanted to move it more towards construction supplies. So it's just
Turn it this way.
You have budget amendment number 21. This is just bringing our budget in line and appropriations with the actual allocation for capital projects from the county commission. Note that this is actually the allocation for the 17-18 fiscal year that we're now receiving.
Any questions? Seeing no questions, thank you, Mr. Jones.
Thank you.
That was an easy one. Mr. Cappy? Purchase of the HVA equipment for the Riverdale Boiler Chiller Renovation Project.
Yes, ma'am. What
Can
you
I
have?
say hallelujah?
Yes. Well, partial hallelujah. What we have on the agenda is a proposal to purchase the units and all the accoutrement that go with them for the Riverdale Boiler Chiller Renovation Project. It's 51 units total, if memory serves. This is not the end of this. This is really the first approval the board will have, because the bid package will be coming behind it in the spring for everything else, all the other scope of work, ceiling tile and grid, LED lights, window replacement, ductwork, demo out of existing boiler and chiller, and all of the piping associated with it. The reason we're recommending to do this piece first, a few reasons. One, there's a significant cost savings in the district purchasing the units, taking advantage of our sales tax exempt status. You look, it's almost a $500,000 purchase. If you threw 9.75% sales tax on that, you're looking at about $50,000 additional. Then we save the general contractor's markup, which conservatively 10%, that's another $50,000 in savings. So there's a cost savings there. Also, in the past, when we've done HVAC replacements at Houston High, at Dogwood, we've run into delays in receiving the equipment, and delays in receiving the equipment we really just can't afford on this project because the timeline is going to be so tight. So if we, assuming we do get it approved tonight, we will go ahead and move forward to get these units into manufacturing, schedule ship dates so that we are ensured day one when the students and the teachers are out, we will be able to hit the ground running full steam ahead. So this is our recommendation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about it.
Any questions?
Where would the storage of the units be?
So what we will try to do is schedule them to be shipped right around the time and staged right there at the school.
Right, okay, good. That was a little concerned about where we
Yes.
would put 29 units, but yeah, that's good.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Cappy.
Thank you.
Great job.
Next item, and you do have it in your folder, is the proposed legislative agenda. I did bring you also, just for your own edification, a copy of Arlington's. Arlington sent us theirs. The reason we are dealing with this evening is because, I don't know if you had Arlington, is because we have a legislative breakfast on January the 4th.
Right.
And so we need to be able to,
Thank you.
but this shows you Arlington's, which is, we're all fairly closely aligned. So, as you might notice from last year's, the district verification data was on there last year. That was accomplished at last year's legislative session. And then the only other one was appointed director of schools, and that has kind of dropped off the radar. So the proposed agenda has that deleted.
And I think the advertising of surplus property, we've tried that for 2 years.
We've tried it for 2
Newspapers
years.
have fought us, and maybe hold off a couple of years and try it again. But
have
I
effectively
think-
blocked us. Mhm.
Hold on. The ratio on the nurses, is it 750 now? Because I think in our delegate assembly, we were talking 700.
They said 700 in the delegate assembly.
Yes. To 1 to 700 instead of 1 to 750. I was looking at it because
Yeah.
So that's an adjustment.
Yeah,
just
Okay.
on the
I
numbers.
can change
Yeah,
that.
just change it to 700 because
If
that
that's
was what
okay.
was voted on.
I think with
Yes.
TSBA, I think we kind of want to align with that.
Yeah, unfortunately, wasn't able to go to the delegate assembly, so that, good deal, good catch, thank you. Is there anything else, any other concerns? Did rearrange a little bit, put the limited testing as the number one, kind of to prioritize where we all were. If that's acceptable to you, is there any,
Do we want to say any specific things? Do we want to be specific to say that we want something to replace something, or just leave it general right now?
Right, because I was looking at, just like you're saying, Linda, from the delegate assembly, there was discussion of the ACT suite.
They were asking to replace the EOC,
Right, but,
is
Yeah.
what they were asking.
I
Yes.
mean, we could be specific and say, for example,
Yeah,
use
with
the use of,
So it's up to the board.
And I think for us,
Be
that's,
helpful.
yes, that's our objective when we talk about the bigger picture. And talk about the fact that we've had testing issues continually for 3 years straight, and with an existing test that already comes back in time and has a suite that goes 3rd through 12th grade, it's an easy solution that would save the
And
state.
I would say what they said was to call on the Tennessee Department of Education to allow school districts to choose the ACT suite of assessments in lieu of the EOC
Right.
test.
can you send me that since I have this and I'll get that in there? Okay.
If that seems good to everybody.
Yeah, I'd like to use the wording they use in the
Here.
delegate assembly.
I brought my booklet because I was,
Yeah, or here, I
All
can
of
give
it.
you want my book, you can just take it home if you want, I've got it too.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't want to sit here and write it down.
okay, that's fine. You can take a picture.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, my phone's up there. I'll get it when I
Yeah,
go.
that's fine.
I was good and left my phone in my purse. Are there any other questions, concerns, suggestions?
Are we, okay, yeah, there it is. I'm just trying to review what my notes were of what I thought was a priority from the delegate assembly, and I want to make sure.
Now, the two things I pulled from the delegate assembly was the nurses,
Mhm.
mandate for 700, and the ACT
Mhm.
suite.
Do we, with the fund all BEP recommendations and priorities, do we want to speak at all to the funding of teacher positions by school instead of by district?
Well, we can also, once we get to that, there'll be certain bills that we can align
That we
this
can
to.
align that to?
That's what
Okay.
I would suggest, is wait and
That's
see
a
what
good
bills
idea.
come
Come,
forth.
actually
and
make it
then-
through committee.
Then we can align them with each.
You don't want to get it so specific that we miss out on an opportunity to support something.
So I'd say wait and let's see what bills come forth, and then we can align them with
That sounds good.
our agenda.
Right?
Okay, I got it. I just needed y'all to have
Thank
time
you.
to discuss something. No, thank you. Anything else? Okay.
Just remind everybody that if they have an RSVP, think about this, to RSVP.
Has everybody RSVP'd?
They have to RSVP straight to Glenda. has to-
Glenda, gotcha.
I already have.
Have you been able to do that? Okay.
She may not have received, have you
She
received
was
the
on list.
invitation?
I double checked.
Okay,
and she
good.
was on it. She
Okay.
said that-
Okay, I went back and that's what we were talking about the date the other day. Ms. Landers, will it be voting on the business meeting
Yes,
as
will be
amended?
as amended.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Subramanian.
Okay.
Y'all are good with that? We will be considering that as part of our voting agenda this evening. Next on our agenda is a bullying task force update. Mr. Bland?
And we do have a PowerPoint to go with what we're doing, so if you can all see. Do you have a timer, Mr. Gray? So we're going to make sure that, especially when Mr. Hatter gets here, we want to make sure we stay on pace. So we got a timer. I don't think.
Oh, good. What time are you doing? Because I forgot my time.
It's actually an iPad. Okay, so I'm going to do this again during the larger board meeting too, during the superintendent's report, because I think it's important to highlight a lot of the things we're doing in the district. So I do have some prepared things to say. But we all know, actually we're waiting. There we go. Okay, so we all know, based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that before any academic learning can occur, students must be provided with a safe and nurturing learning environment. It is my commitment and my staff's to ensure that those needs are being met. Starting this school year, we have made it a priority to analyze all of our efforts around whole child development while taking active steps to increase parent, staff, and student training. But I think the best analogy or parable that I can refer to is the parable of the blind man and the elephant. It's an ancient Indian proverb. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it. There's a kid's version with mice. But they're all touching parts of the elephant, and they're only seeing their one section or their one part of the elephant. And when they talk to the different mice, or in this picture it's different individuals, they all have a different perspective of what the elephant is. It's like a rope, it's like a tree, it's a wall, it's a fan, depending on what part they're touching. And so when I look at our efforts around whole child development, I want us to take that global view of this. So when we look at the different stakeholders, and if you ask them each what's happening around whole child development, they're going to tell you their section that they're feeling or touching or experiencing. And I think the goal for this board and the district staff is to highlight that big picture, to highlight all the things that are being done in all the different stakeholder groups. So I have Mr. Bland's going to help me, and I know Mr. Hattow's coming in, so he'll slide. He's driving from Nashville, so he'll slide on in. But just to talk about all the different groups that are doing things around whole child development, we have a no bullying task force that's been actively meeting, and we've been providing updates to the board. We have school counselors, social workers that are in each of our schools that are working around whole child development. The general public, we've involved school administrators, 3rd through 12th grade students, school staff, and we have state, district, and school board leadership, because the state has also taken an active role. So our objective today is to really highlight the efforts of each of these groups that they're doing around social and emotional learning, and also highlight our future plans, because it's not just about where we are, it's how are we moving forward with this process, because we want the best for every single student that's in our district. So we're going to kind of tag team. So we'll start with Mr. Bland, who's really been involved with the No Bullying Task Force, to talk a little bit about that group.
So I will talk about since the group started, we formed the task force in June, and the first meeting was in July. And the first meeting, we set 3 goals that we wanted to accomplish for the task force. And those 3 goals were to collect baseline data from the student survey. There was a student survey that was administered in September, and it was about a 2-week period where students were able to take this survey to have various questions around social, emotional health, school climate, and bullying, intimidation, and harassment. So they were able to take that in September. We've also researched and discussed anti-bullying curriculum and communication with parents, between parents and the school. We've talked about Second Step. We've discussed Above the Line, and you'll hear OVAS a lot tonight. We have sent counselors to OVAS training. It's an international and probably the most widely known anti-bullying and bullying prevention program that there is today. So we have sent 2 counselors to that to be trained. And then reflection and analysis. Back in the October meeting, we were able to analyze the student survey data, and from that data, the task force were able to create some reflective statements from that. We put them into small groups, and each group had the data from the surveys. So they took that data and put some of the statements into different groups. Whether it was social, emotional, whether it was physical, whether it was cyber and so forth. So that was really good work that we were able to do with that, and that took place in October. And as you see, these are some of the numbers from the students that took the survey. And again, it was a 2-week period, and the results that we analyzed were from this cohort of students that were able to take this survey. The task force, the first meeting was in July, and then we had the second meeting in October. Back in September, at the board meeting, I gave you guys an update about where we were at the time, what we had completed, and where we were going with next steps. Timeline for the task force, again, it was created in June. What I did was I reached out to principals and asked them to refer to 1 to 2 parents from their schools that may have had firsthand issues with either bullying, harassment, or intimidation at school. So I got those names from the principals, and that's how we were able to form the task force. We also had parents who had background in social, emotional, or mental health fields that were able to take part in the task force as well. July, the goals were established, those 3 goals that we talked about, and we are currently on track to hit all of the goals that we established during our first meeting. We've already hit all of them, but we're going to go back in February after the box out bullying and analyze more data, and we're going to have a post. We're going to do a survey post box out bullying to see if the numbers or the school climate or the students' perceptions change. September is when we administered the survey. October, again, this is when we had the discussion at the task force, and you'll see some of these slides you'll see more than once, because what we felt was important, that whatever we did with the task force, we felt that it was important to do with the staff. We felt it was important to do with the administrators and also the parent stakeholder group. So you may see some slides more than once, and I'll briefly touch those, but I think they're highlighted in gray. And we'll have the final task force meeting towards the end of February. We have box out bullying coming. They're gonna put on 10 shows. They're gonna do 2 at Dogwood, 2 at Farmington, 3 at Riverdale, and 3 at Houston Middle. And that's over a span of 3 days. The contract for that has been signed. They have provided us with some literature to hand out to students, to post around schools, and to disseminate out in the community. So that should be going out soon.
And just a refresher, the box out bullying is a theater group that comes in and does training for students around anti-bullying. So it should be
it's in here down the line, but I'll hit it now.
Yes.
They provide age appropriate performances that hit on bullying prevention. They address the bully, they address the victim, and they address any person that may see the interactions happening. And they teach you how to report, what you should do, what you're looking for, but they're age appropriate again, and that's why they break it up into different shows for different schools.
Okay, so we're going to move on to our next group of stakeholders. So we've got the bullying task force, and so if you remember looking at their goals and objectives, they're really looking at culture, they're looking at surveys, they're looking at curriculum, they're talking about that. So now I'm going to talk about some of those action steps that our different groups are performing. So Ms. Diaz and her administrative team have really focused on whole child, and they're talking about how can we really develop the whole child. So just in the past couple of years, they've made a really concerted effort to train their staff. So they have created the HMS house system, and where did that come from? I know that when parents hear, they think of Harry Potter, where you've got the Gryffindor and the Slytherin and the different houses and the competition that leads up to us, but it's really founded in whole child education. And they have taken almost their entire staff. I think they have 5 teachers left to take this school year to the Ron Clark Academy, and I think it's in Atlanta, Georgia. But this academy and this training focuses around academic rigor, but also creating that whole child environment for students. And how are we growing and building relationships in that school? And so when they look at their house system, all the students in the school are assigned to houses, and they've named them after different types of horses, and they have reveal ceremonies, just like the hat sorting that happens in Harry Potter. But the goal of it is to not just have a house system where they're having this competition. It's about embedding character lessons every single week. So every Friday, they meet with their houses in the grade level. So it's not just about the lessons too, it's about having that mentor, that adult in that classroom so that they can work with those students. And the way that they really earn the points, they're not playing Quidditch, I can remember the name. They're not playing Quidditch, they're not flying around on brooms. But what they're doing is they get incentives for acts of kindness. So when they are recognized for doing good things around the school, they're earning points for their houses. And also too, if they find a way to increase academic rigor in their classroom setting, so if they're given an assignment and they find a way to amp up that activity, they're earning points for their houses. And you can see they just had a celebration, I think it was last week, where they had the Polar Express and one of the houses won the competition, so they were able to celebrate that group of students. So know that it is focused around whole child instruction and making sure that students feel connected to the school. Now, we're excited, and Miss Christian couldn't be here tonight, but she has won the Counselor of the Year award again for what she's doing. But she has crafted lessons that they're pushing into the classrooms with those students. So on those Fridays, when they have Mustang Fridays, the teachers and the students are all connected to this process and are all engaged in how are they really developing students at Houston Middle School. And they really did surveys with the students to figure out which lessons would be most appropriate for those students. So they have a plan around social and emotional learning. But not just are we sending our teachers to be trained at the Ron Clark Academy, we're bringing those experts in here. So they actually brought in Kim Bearden, who was one of the co-founders of the Ron Clark Academy. I think she was the National Teacher of the Year this past year too. And she did whole group instruction with the different grade levels at Houston Middle School, just working around how can they build those relationships, how can they really develop that culture of kindness in the school and responsibility within the school. So it was a special day. She also did staff training after she met with all of the students at the school. So training for the staff, PD at the academy, and then also here at the school, and for the students. We're bringing in lots of different ways to engage them and really change and create something special at Houston Middle School. Then at the high school, they are also doing very special things. So we're thankful for Mr. Legault, who really worked with the guidance department there, and Ms. Fisher, and they developed Future Ready Day. So we have the Senior Retake Day, where they're taking the ACT a second time, but they wanted to build something really special at the high school. So one of the things they did was on that day, and because you have to change the whole school schedule that day to give the ACT, with the freshman class, they were bringing in adult mentors, and some of the people who actually serve on the Bullying Task Force were there to work with students. We had team leaders that were working with students. They're doing skills with Navient, so they're doing all types of future training. I know, Ms. Crowder, you can talk more about Future Ready Day if you want to hit that mic right next to you. You actually went to it to attend.
Sure. They divided the 9th grade class in half, and Mr. Legault made it very clear that, inspired by the new emphasis on social emotional learning in the district, the high school would like to get behind this and look at ways that they can build more community at the high school. And one opportunity he saw was to use their homeroom teachers. So the 9th grade homeroom teachers were actually a big part of this team building exercise as well. And in some cases, there were students walking away feeling like they had met people and experienced new people in a way that they weren't getting to do otherwise during their regular schedule. Besides the team building, Ms. Fisher led a bullying prevention workshop specifically aimed at high school freshmen, which they also felt like was a needed component of the school at the beginning of the school year. Meanwhile, Navient's really focused on all the tools that are available to a 9th grader. I think Sarah Schmidt, their college and career counselor, shared with me that she felt like it would be a good exercise for a 9th grader to know what the juniors knew about how to use Naviance and how it can help them craft their future plans. There are personality and strength-finding inventories, for example, in Naviance. Beyond just submitting transcripts, there's a lot of things it can do to help them prepare for the future. And so she took half of the 9th grade class and gave them basically a lesson on how to utilize that platform. And then there was a switch.
So when we look at our next stakeholder group, and we talk about the school counselors, I think the goal for us, and I hope we've shown that as a district, is we don't always want to be status quo. We're always trying to look to improve and get better in the actions and activities that we're doing. So Mr. Hattow's really done, with Mr. Bland, a lot of work talking about school counselors and how can we really increase what they're doing and really work with PLCs to make them a powerful group. But he talks about some of the roles, so if you'll go ahead and switch to the next slide. So one of the things that we're looking at, he's trying to talk about social emotional learning throughout the district. So they're really covering what's the curriculum that we're using, what is the role of the school counselor, what are the things that pull our current school counselors away from their jobs, really teaching whole child, where they have to be academic counselors. And then how do we get that vertical alignment going from elementary school to middle school to high school, so that they can be great curriculums, but are they really tied to each other? Those are some of the focuses that Mr. Hatto has taken on this year to really look at what is the role of the school counselor and how can we improve either our staffing or the programs that we're using. So in September, we had our initial district-wide counselor meeting where they start looking at our objectives and know that this was a priority for us this year in the district, to look at whole child development, to talk about bullying, to talk about the cultures of the schools. And so that's some of the focus that they did in those initial counselor meetings. Mr. Bland, if you want to talk about October.
And then October, what we were able to do, we made that group a little bit smaller with 2 to 3 counselors and Ms. Fisher from the high school. We were able to have meetings about some of the topics that were being discussed in the bullying task force. So we created a smaller task force to address some of those issues that will then go back into the counseling curriculum and back into the classroom. So we started doing that in October. We've had a few meetings with the school counselors about that. And then the student services, Mrs. Law, she had a meeting with the school counselors as well, and she talked about—
And just to clarify, Ms. Law is our district-wide
licensed clinical social worker for the district. She went over SCUDA, and SCUDA is a time management system which you provide. It helps counselors organize their day based on feedback that they get from teachers and based on feedback that they get from students about the things that they need to do. So it helps them put their programs into play, into action, and it's a record-keeping program that they use that we purchase for them yearly, and they use it daily, and it's one of the best things that they have to go on because they do needs assessments yearly, and based on those needs assessments, that's what guides their curriculum for the year. November, we were able to send Carla Christian and Jonathan Pritchett to the OVAS. This is the program that you'll hear a lot about tonight. We thought it was important to get them there, and it came at a pretty hefty cost to the district, but we think it's important based on the climate that we're in right now. So we sent them to be trainers.
So they're training the trainers to come back and bring and redeliver.
They attended in November, and what we plan to do in January, we're going to get a small group together of principals, and I think myself, Mrs. Law, Dr. Park, and one more person. We're going to get together and talk about the training that they had and talk about implementation in Germantown and see if it's a fit for the district, see if it's something that we want to utilize going forward, and if so, you'll see that rollout coming after the January meeting. But they were really excited to attend, and based on feedback that I got, it was a really good training for them.
And so then going forward, like we said, one of the roles of not just the bullying task force, but the student services department is to look at all the curriculum district-wide around whole child development. And once they have established whether that's the system that we want to use, they will develop the pacing guide that goes with that. It's detailed and make sure that it plugs into each of the schools' specific cultures. So like at Houston Middle School, for example, those Fridays where they have those lessons, how can that plug in to their existing system where they're working with students? So that's our goal, and we will present that to the board once they complete this process.
So for the general public, based on feedback that we received towards the end of last school year, we felt that it was important to take action immediately. So in May 2018, we had a bullying forum at Houston Middle School. And what that was, it was very informal. It was Student Services Department. We went in, we had a group of parents. We talked about any and everything that they wanted to discuss surrounding bullying, surrounding school climate, whatever they wanted to talk about. We were available. I made myself available for a couple of hours, answered questions, and had just a good old-fashioned conversation about where we are right now. And then that was
There we go.
Mr. Grace.
Once or twice a year, the schools and actually Ms. Denise Fisher has brought in some experts to come and talk to the students and even the parents about online safety, digital footprint, cyberbullying. They'll actually meet with the students during the day and then have a session at night for parents to come. It was in one of those sessions we actually had a group of parents talking, and we're talking about how foreign the issues of social media are to us because we didn't grow up with social media and can't get advice from our parents about this. And from that, it kind of spawned it's called a Germantown Parents Tech Talk. It's a Facebook page where parents can go and kind of just post questions out there for other parents to jump in and help. How are you dealing with this? Here are some links, here are some stories going on. And our technology team is on that page as well, and we're watching it. So it's a great tool to have, and it's something that we're hoping more parents can jump on and be involved in that discussion.
Who started that?
It is we got the Amy Jenkins and Miss Young at
Okay, thank you.
So in addition to the forum that we had in May, we felt that it would be a good idea to bring in an expert. Roger Dinwiddie is the CEO of Stars Nashville. He's a very powerful speaker if you've ever heard one of his presentations. He is an expert in the field of bullying, intimidation, and harassment. He does state trainings, and you'll see we also sent a group of administrators to hear him in September. But he came in during our professional development day in August.
And this is a change than what we've done in the past. So after our initial kickoff day, we actually kept all the staff at all of our schools together to hear Mr. Dinwiddie's presentation, because like I said at the beginning, this was a priority for the district, something that we saw as a focus. And so we wanted them to know that it was different. It was a different schedule, and we were bringing in this individual for a purpose.
So he spoke to the staff, and after he spoke to the staff, he stuck around and he had a session with parents. Again, he talked about any and everything that they wanted to talk about. He had a presentation, but he also fielded questions and gave them his input about things that he has heard from district level administration about what we've been having go on in the past few months. So that was in August, and then for the general public, there will be a parent survey, a school climate survey that'll go out to all parents in February.
So that'll be in 2019?
2019.
Yes, sorry. Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
No, just making
Yeah,
sure.
2019.
I didn't miss something.
No, February
We're gonna
29th.
go
Sorry.
back.
typo.
Let's go
Yes.
back and do it.
Okay, and then going forward in the future, as you know, we shared how we are embarking on the process of redeveloping our strategic plan as a district. And so when we talk about some of those gaps, some of those holes that we feel are in our strategic plan, one of those areas was around whole child. And so when we look at how strategic plans are done well, it's having those town hall listening tours where we're going out and having them at each of our schools listening to concerns or questions or comments around whole child development strategies, all non-academic topics. So know that that will be coming here in this next 6-month window, that we will have those. There will be specific sessions at schools just around whole child development, but there will also be other ones in the schools, around the other topics we have, like academic rigor, staffing, HR. We're going to embark on that process. So then our next group of people that we're really working with are school administrators. So we're moving through those groups of stakeholders. So when we look at our timeline for school administrators, know that when we have regular principal meetings with our staff. And one of our goals that we talk about, or we look at the new professional standards that we have, and it talks about bullying, it talks about reporting, and know that that was highlighted when we were going over that training. But also we talk about, once again, that this was a priority for the district to focus on whole child. So when you think about the house system that's developed at Houston Middle School, and I'm glad that Mr. Legault came in, what they did around Future Ready Day, those are incredible, innovative thinking things that they are doing at their schools because we've said that this is a focus for us and a priority. But also they've taken advantage of TOSS, which is the Tennessee Organization of School Superintendents. They provide training for administrators throughout the state. And so when you see the numbers behind it, those are how many individuals that we have sent to the different trainings that TOSS has offered us. So know that some of ours, we actually sent 2 people to the State Adverse Childhood Experiences training. So know that 2 people went to that. And then Chauncey, I think you've got September.
The September training was, again, Roger Dinwiddie. Not only did we hear him here, we also traveled to Jackson. It was myself, Mr. Haddow, and 2 other people from Student Services, and Mr. Legault and Mr. Ross from the high school attended those trainings. And he covered everything from whole child to discipline to ACEs. He covered the adverse childhood experiences. He covered it. It was a really good session. So he was able to provide that training for him in September. Also in September's principals meeting, we discussed anonymous alerts. In the past year, you've heard a lot about that. We have some really good we've been getting really good feedback and really good information from that program. It's helped us solve a lot of issues and a lot of cases at every school, specifically the high school. But we talked about going in and properly closing cases. When you go in and properly close a case, you have to communicate to parents. Part of the Tennessee state law, anytime that you have a report of bullying, you have to start your investigation within a certain amount of time. You also have to conclude your investigation with a communication to parents. So we discussed that in the September principals meeting, and that's something that we do once or twice a year just to make sure everybody's on the same page as a refresher. We also looked at investigation techniques. I think one of the most important things we can do as a district is to properly investigate any claim of bullying, any claim of any kind of discipline that administrators have to face on a day-to-day basis. So we do that on a regular basis. We have conversations about what's going on, what they're seeing, and we just have a conversation about what we feel like is best practice for them to use on a day-to-day basis. And we also cover discipline trends, and that's something that we try to do quarterly. I'll run discipline reports and I'll get those to principals. And again, we have a conversation about what they're seeing and anything that we can do to help them in student services, we will do. October principals meeting, again, we went over reporting procedures. This can be anything from a DCS report to a bullying report to a anything that you need, anything that has to be reported. We went over proper reporting procedures for teachers, staff. You know, some things that happen at schools, they have to report to law enforcement. So those are some of the things that we went over in the October meeting. Again, we went through the OVAS and let the principals know that we were sending someone to that in November and to be on the lookout for more information coming with that. We also attended Leaders in the Law, and that was with Chuck Cagle. He's a Department of Education attorney, and he's, again, he's really good at what he does. He provides guidance for me, everything from SPED to civil to searches and seizures, anything that may happen on the school campus, he covers.
And then, of course, we had more training in November, state leaders, changing culture training. So know that we did send 3 individuals. And this is for principals and also assistant principals, so it's the administration.
Who attended that?
Yeah.
I would have to pull the log of, you know who went to that one? I know
not.
I'd have to
Do
pull
you know
this
what
one.
schools they came from?
It's a variety of schools.
think
We can pull the logs
Mr.
and tell you which
Haddows.
ones.
Okay.
Okay, and then, this is you, Mr. Blaine.
January of 19, once, probably shortly after we discuss the OBAS, we'll have a principal share out with the results from the survey. Those results have not been disclosed to principals yet, but we'll disclose those to principals, and we'll have them do much of the same work the task force did to let them know what students are saying about their climate and culture on their campuses.
So our next group of stakeholders that we're talking about are our students, specifically 3rd through 12th grade students. And so we'll go through some of those sections. And I think, Mr. Brace, you have the first one.
You know, as we work into more devices in the district and more of a one-to-one environment, we want to hit the students early. So part of the typing program that we've introduced for 2nd through 4th graders, there is a digital citizenship component. So we've created kind of a learning path, and you know, for the first 4 lessons, we have a digital citizenship component part of it. So one would be surfing safety, the second one would be cyber safety, third is online behavior, talking about your digital footprint, and the third would be email rules and manners. I'm sorry, fourth would be email rules and manners. So we're going to start that in 2nd grade. They're going to go through those lessons. They basically go through that typing class like a MAPS class every 2 weeks. They'll do that in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and 4th grade. We'll just keep hitting them. We think it needs to be repetitive, so they can't hear too much of it, so we'll keep doing it 3 years in a row.
And again, that's one thing great. We've discussed it earlier. Those are in September, the students took the climate survey.
And then in October, Assistant Superintendent, that's Mr. Hatta. Like I said, I'm filling in for him. He started leading small student focus groups at the high school. And he's looking at how can we best utilize Naviance, looking at strength finders, really developing those leaders around non-academic goals. So he's attended some national training, so he talks about the Kettering Foundation that he's gone to, that's really focusing on how can we really acknowledge students and recognizing them for more than just an ACT score or how they're doing in a class, because we want to honor all of our children for their strengths and their assets that they have. And that's his goal in working with these student focus groups. He's trying to spread that focus, and it's spreading to teachers too. When you think about teachers that are sending emails and comments home to students about non-academic things that they've achieved or succeeded, that's one of their goals. And then of course we had the Future Ready Day, like we've already talked about, at the high school for our students.
That's January of 2019 actually. The school safety specialist, Mr. Crump, he had planned to start this small group, call it committee or a small group of students that were identified at the high school to discuss school safety issues, school culture, school climate, social, emotional. They were going to cover a wide gamut of topics, but after a conversation he and I had, I think it would be best to expand it to K-12. So we pushed, it was supposed to happen in December, but we're going to push that to January so we can get input from K-8 teachers, so we can get more students on that task, on that committee. It'll be a small group of hopefully about 30 kids just to talk about things that are going on, because one of the most important things that we can do as a district is to make sure that each student has someone that they feel safe talking to at school.
Question on that. How will they be selected?
Yeah, how do they?
We're going for the, initially it went to the high school principal, but after he and I had a conversation, I think we're going to open it up to school counselors. They're going to be recommended by school counselors or school administrators as students that may be on the fence. They're struggling either academically or they've shown some type of social emotional issues that we need to pull them in further and have some one-on-one dialogue or small group or whatever we need to do. But we're going to let the schools identify those kids.
Okay.
And I actually missed, in my Houston Middle School presentation, I missed the fact that they've also done 2 student surveys now around their students around culture. So they did one in August and they did one in December. just recently. And part of that goal is, and we've talked about the DOT activity that they did at the high school in the past, where they went around and they look at teachers who have a relationship with a child, and so they try to identify those children who aren't really connecting to those adult mentors. And so using those results from the student surveys, they have really worked with those house groups and make sure that in those small groups that we talked about on those House Fridays, that they are contacting those students, working with those students, and then monitoring if there's a change in the percentage of students who don't feel connected at the middle school. So I missed that out during my House presentation.
So back to the high school, the DOT system, I know they're not currently using that. Are they considering returning to that?
Yeah, so when we look at surveys and they talk about that mentoring for their groups, yes, that is one of their focuses that they have, making sure.
Potentially moving back to.
Yes, that in some form or fashion, that's just one way to identify students who don't have a connection.
School staff.
Okay, so our next group, when we talk about those group of stakeholders, remember the same theme here is the people who are touching the elephant. What is each group doing? What is each group experiencing? So once again, all the staff, and this was the first that we've done this, that first week before school started, we trained everybody with the state's expert. We paid extra to bring him in to train all of ours. And then Mr. Haddo and his team also went out to do school level trainings at each of our schools. So we have the new standards on ethics for teachers around reporting, and so know that they did a presentation with all of the staffs on the new professional standards and how it relates to whole child and reporting bullying.
And to go along with Mr. Dinwiddie, in September, during the first 60 days of school, school counselors will, during a faculty meeting, they have a state mandated bullying, intimidation, and harassment training to all staff. And that's done during the first 60 days of school. So it was.
How is that done? By video?
It's a combination of video and conversation presentations. Their counselors are trained yearly, and they're trained as trainer, and so they go back and present yearly. This is something that we do every year.
And of course, we've talked about Future Ready Day, so the school staff were involved in developing the activity, and of course, we talked about Kim Bearden, who was the co-founder of the Ron Clark Academy, coming in and training the staff at Houston Middle School. So like I said, we have these activities that are touching and really interacting with multiple stakeholder groups. And then going forward, Ms. Blaine wants to do Thunder on January. Once again, this is 2019.
So every group, every stakeholder group that we've spoken to you about in the last 30 minutes, they're going to do the same thing that the Bullying Task Force did, where they're going to look at the student survey data and do the same activities that they did. So you'll see that here, and you'll see it again with the school board, because I think we're going to have you guys do the same activity.
Good.
And then, of course, going forward for us, we have a February Professional Development Day. Social emotional learning and health will be a component of that too, just like we do academic pieces. We will have that piece for their PD session in February. So now the school staff is going to get multiple touches. So if you look at Houston Middle School, for example, they've had Mr. Dinwiddie train them at the beginning of the school year. They've had Kim Bearden come in and train them. And we're going to do another, they had their school counselors train them in those first few days. Then we're going to do this training again in the PD day. We're making sure they're getting a lot of contact, because this is a priority for us for the district, and we're making sure they're getting those pieces.
For you guys, back in May, we put out the invite for anyone who is interested to come in and look at the actual discipline logs, discipline data, anonymous alerts reports, bullying spreadsheet data, and that's something, the bullying spreadsheet is something that's fluid, and it's a living document. Anytime that an administrator is presented with a case, they go and they investigate the case, they log it into the bullying spreadsheet. We have access to it. Whenever we want to look at it, we look at that, because we do have to provide a state report yearly based on those findings. So that's something that we do. And again, that's back in May when we had you guys come in, for those that were interested. For those that were not here in May, whenever Mr. Manuel would like to put that on the books, we can do the same thing.
And the key here is it's not typical for board members to go through all of the data of our students. It's more about the process so you can see how things are reported, how they're recorded, how Mr. Bland's team fills out the OCR report that we have to complete. I think this is one of those years again that we've got the OCR report coming, so you can really see the process behind it. So John, so we did,
September?
Yes, so you're September now?
School board. Safe Schools Training, that is a series of videos that covers everything from OSHA to sexual harassment for employees. It also covers bullying, intimidation, harassment. So as you heard me say that phrase several times tonight, there are many touches that faculty and staff get throughout the year involving bullying, intimidation, and harassment. And also that student survey, again, that's in gray, so we'll do that. And then that's also when we reported the update to the task force back in September. March, November.
Okay, so actually I think you went backwards to, okay, so November. So one of the things that we've done within our departments and within the central office is we have created these focus groups talking about how can we roll it, how can we improve our curriculum, how can we improve our communication, and of course we've launched a discussion of the strategic planning process, trying to identify those goals and objectives for us, and how are we going to really increase the presence of the whole child in our strategic planning process. Okay, so one of the things that we'll be asking for this board is, I think it would be helpful, we're trying to get as much as we can done in this time, but I do think it would be helpful in March to have a session, work session just for this board around our whole child programs. We will have finished the bullying task force, share out, and have y'all also recreate and look at the data that we got from our survey results. And you'll have two different pieces because we'll have the pre and the post data from our students. So that would be something that we would be recommending. And of course, based on what we've already seen, the budget season is coming. And so we do think that we need some investments in our counseling programs, our whole child development. That's something that we want to look for. So next steps for us that you're going to see, there's a third no bullying task force that will meet, a parent climate survey. We've addressed all these things throughout the presentation. There will be survey task forces that are working on the different components, box out bullying presentations that you'll see at your schools. Of course, the OVAS evaluation of that program, and that is the national program that we are strongly considering for our schools. And of course, you'll see some February budget requests and then March updates for y'all as the Board of Education. So, what do we know? I think it's important for us to talk about the fact that, and this is from the Tennessee Department of Education, that 1 out of every 5 children has a mental health condition. And that's something that I think that we have to acknowledge, that schools are taking on greater and greater responsibilities for providing these supports to students. So when I talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, until we meet these mental health needs, they're not going to learn, they're not going to progress through school to their greatest potential. And that's one of our goals, is to remove those barriers. The higher cost of college tuition and pressures, when we think about what kids are experiencing around ACT scores, their test scores, their exams, and this is a great time for it, we have put them in this pressure cooker of success. And so it's something to consider. How do we remove that pressure cooker? And then third bullet, social emotional learning and competencies have been a point of focus. They've been rolled out by the Tennessee Department of Education. It's just not us that are seeing these trends and issues. The state is recognizing that we are creating a difficult challenge for students. Something to consider as the board. So we talk about the BEP funding formula and the components. And so when we get ready to go into the budget season, this is something I want you to consider. As we have increased the district, and this is straight from the Tennessee Blue Book of BEP funding, you look at the percentage, the number of social workers that they say they provide funding for, it's 1 for every 2,000. Currently we have 2 in the district for 6,000 students. We haven't increased the role of the social worker. That would be something that I would be recommending. When you look at elementary guidance, and I think it's 1 for every 500, I'd have to look and see.
Yes, it's
Yeah, it's 1 for every 500. And then when you look at the secondary guidance, and I think it's 1 for every 350 when I look at the number of students, we are not hitting all of those ratios and numbers, so we see some needs of adding additional counselors. And I think that an even bigger problem, so this is a breakdown of what we currently have. No, at Dogwood and Farmington, we currently have one position at Dogwood, one position at Farmington, but there's an individual who switches between the two schools, which is a difficult challenge for scheduling because they are pushing into the MAP schedule. So you can see the current ratio is in red, 1 to 629 at Dogwood, 1 to 545 at Farmington. We will have to hire one. When we look at Riverdale's K-5, it's 1 for 455. At 6-8, they have 1 for 515. Those are the ratios for their counselors. Houston Middle Schools, 1 counselor for 478 students. Houston High Schools, 1 for 375. All the ones in red are over those state allotments. So we think that we do need to make some investment in our counselors. But even at the high school, when you look at how we use them, they spend so much time being academic counselors, making sure that dealing with homework, dealing with graduation requirements, that they don't get to do a lot of the whole child instruction or involvement. They don't really get to push in and help those individual students. And when we talk about our elementary schools, they're part of the MAP schedule. So they're pushing in doing whole class lessons when maybe what they need to be doing are one-on-one lessons or really small group lessons with students. So no, that's an investment that we see that we will need in the district. And so this just spells out some of the things that I will be asking us to consider. 1 additional counselor. We know we're going to need one at the new elementary school. I also think we need to add an additional counselor at Dogwood and Farmington so they can have a full-time position. They can have 2 at Dogwood, 2 at Farmington. When we look at Houston Middle School, you'll see the additional counselor. Houston High School, an additional counselor, and then of course the social worker. We talked about the staffing for that. So Mr. Haddo, perfect timing.
You've got.
Yes, you got 3 minutes. But when we talk about the K through 5 current counselors and talk about where do they see the biggest gap in what we need, it really is around what their job entails. And do they need to be doing as much whole group instruction? They need more one-on-one instruction. They need more small group counseling sessions. So if you want to pick up.
Yeah, to jump in on this, and I apologize for being late.
He's driving from Nashville.
The staffing needs, and talking to the school counselors throughout the course of the semester, one thing that we found is that they really want to be in the one-to-one sessions with children. So you have to ask what's pulling them away from being with children. It's the MAP scheduling where they're doing whole class instructional activities on a weekly basis. So they're conflicted with time and time management. So what we're asking for is some additional counselors, and I think Mr. Manuel probably went through the BEP staff ratios. Right now there are some schools that are understaffed as far as school counseling goes. And when you look at the school counselors, some of them have license or they're teachers and they came from the teaching realm, but a lot of them came straight from the counseling realm. So their strengths and to leverage their strengths, it may not be whole classroom instruction. However, it is with one-to-one directive services or responsive services with kids. So what we're really looking for is that we're doing that ask. The other piece along the lines is when you look at the role of the administrator, that too has changed. And what you're seeing is that a lot of administrators are caught up with 504s, IEPs that are important, so I don't want to undermine the importance of that because it is a duty as an LEA, but it's taking them out of the hallways, it's taking them out of the classrooms where they can see and be directly involved with students. Some of my training, and I've been really fortunate to be trained throughout the state, the administrator in training is a concept that I took. I think I was in Lexington at a training session, and I saw it along the wall, and the administrator in training is actually a certified teacher who has an administrative license, and they want to get into the world of administration. So that administrator in training could possibly offset and pick up some of these IEP meetings. They could pick up some of the evaluation load. They could pick up some of the 504s, and it is also a route to succession possibly, growing a leader.
And so We're going to do a snapshot of this because we think it's important to do this during the superintendent's report. So you're going to hear some of this again, and we're going to move quicker through some of it. So Mr. Haddo, so for this, we're going to pick up and continue talking about just the strength finders and where he sees the high school program going, and also the middle school program, so how we can grow into this. So just to conclude this process, so I know we got to move with time. Hopefully you've seen a snapshot of what our different stakeholders are accomplishing around social emotional learning. I know we didn't highlight all the schools' efforts around these initiatives, but I look forward to sharing some of their work in our upcoming sessions, because I know that we talked about Houston Middle School, Houston High School. They are doing great things at Riverdale, at Dogwood, at Farmington. They're doing incredible things, and their counselors are working really hard. So we're going to share those in upcoming sessions with you. I'm thankful for our staff's calling to serve children in our community. I think what's most important to realize, and I've shared this with some individuals I've talked to, we have caring and kind teachers and staff in this district, and they're doing this because they care about children. That's why they're in this profession. They want to serve our children. They want to provide that best learning environment. So I'm excited about what we're getting ready to build in this district around whole child, especially around strategic plan. And so we'll finish more and go into more depth at the meeting. You're good.
I wanted to thank you for your comprehensive report. I know we're all interested to hear more, and I will, as always, request that the board get a copy of the PowerPoint at some point. We are at the end of the agenda. We do have a lot of people waiting outside. I do want to recommend, if you are in agreement, that we remove from the consent agenda 8B policy 6.206, transfers within the system, and put it on our board action item agenda so that we can have a conversation and a presentation, and that will be item, and you'll have to tell Ms. Supermont.
Yes,
that'll be item 9C.
And know
Are
that
you all okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
Is that what you wanted,
Ms. Luter and Ms. Griffith, and I think all of y'all had asked for more data and information. We did spend today working through all that information, getting that for y'all, so we can have a more detailed discussion around that decision. Yes.
Yes. So I wanted to make sure we got that done before we moved into that. So we really don't have time for further business. My apologies, but we can do a little bit more discussion during the board meeting. With that, the working session stands adjourned, and we will take our places and start as promptly as possible. Evening, everyone. We want to welcome you to this evening's meeting. As we prepare for our meeting, it's a time for us to celebrate. We welcome a new member to our ranks, and we have the Honorable Judge Brandon with us this evening to perform the swearing-in ceremony for both Ms. Griffith and myself, and that will be the first order for tonight is the swearing-in. Yeah, you want to come down?
First, Ms. Griffith. Okay.
Can you help me out here, buddy?
It is again my honor and pleasure to be able to swear in the renewed board members and the new board member. And I'm going to ask you if you would please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. And repeat after me, please. I, Angela Griffith,
I, Angela Griffith,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
I will support, obey, and defend
I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the State of Tennessee,
the Constitution of the State of Tennessee,
the Charter of the City of Germantown,
the Charter of the City of Germantown,
and I will faithfully,
uprightly,
and honestly demean myself and discharge the duties of the Germantown Municipal School District to the best of my ability. So help me God.
So help me God.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Ms. Landers. I think you're going to have to come up here.
You're going to have to come up.
Come on. I can't issue any citations here. If you place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand, please, and repeat after me. I, Betsy Landers,
I, Betsy Landers,
do solemnly swear
that
I will support, obey, and defend
I will support, obey, and defend
the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution of the State of Tennessee,
the Constitution of the State of Tennessee,
and the Charter of the City of Germantown,
and the Charter of the City of Germantown,
and I will faithfully,
uprightly,
and honestly demean myself and discharge the duties of the Germantown Municipal School District to the best of my ability. So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations. Thank everybody for the opportunity again to allow me to do this. It's a great privilege to participate in this wonderful school system that we have. These folks here give up hours and hours of untold service to the community, and we thank you for that. Y'all have a good evening. Merry Christmas to everybody.
Before getting into our agenda, I want to thank Ms. Griffin's family for attending and congratulate and welcome her to part of our school board. She's going to be a valuable member of that, I have no doubt. I would also like to take a moment of personal privilege and thank my friend, Gabby Floor, who you saw help with administering the oath. Gabby and I met as part of a Girl Scout project that she was doing. She is a student leader in the 4th grade at Farmington and a very active Girl Scout, and I was very honored that she and her family would be here with us tonight. She's one of the reasons I do what I do. So thank you, Tim, thank you, Marta, Thank you, Gabby, for being here and honoring me by being part of this tonight. And with that, we will start our agenda. As we begin.
We need to officially sign the oath.
Oh.
We don't want any votes being taken in question.
No, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Judge Brett. We begin every meeting with a moment of silence. Tonight, I ask that you remember the family of Joey Taylor, along with the teachers, administrators, and students of HHS. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. You all, please join as you are able and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I will ask Ms. Griffith if she will lead us this evening. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item of business this evening is the approval of the agenda as amended. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the agenda as amended. Second.
The motion has been made and seconded to approve the agenda as amended. To note for the audience, we have moved an item from the consent agenda under 8B. The consideration of the policy 6.206 transfers within the system to the action item portion of the agenda, and it will be item number 9C. If there's no further discussion, Ms. Subramani, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Fisher? Yes.
Ms. Newton?
Yes.
Ms. Griffin?
Yes.
Ms. Oaf?
Yes.
Chairman Landers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next is our recognition and awards portion of this evening. Superintendent Manuel.
So I have the honor of recognizing some members and stakeholders of our community tonight. The first, Tatum Carter is the winner of the GMSD Holiday Card Contest. Each year, GMSD chooses one piece of artwork to create our district holiday card. We were pleased to announce last month that Tatum Carter of Houston High School has won the contest for 2018 for her work. And if you can see it, there it is on the screen. We would also like to thank, you don't get to go anywhere yet, hold on. We would also like to thank both Amanda Schulter and Bobby Spillman for their work and dedication to the visual arts programming at Houston High School. Congratulations. So now we got to get pictures. One more. Congratulations. Our next is a larger group of recipients. Coding, computer science, and STEM are fields that we are excited to be preparing students for in the Germantown Municipal School District. We have 2 student teams that are finalists at the state level for their extraordinary work. We'd like to recognize both of these teams tonight. We will first recognize the winners of the Congressional App Challenge. This year, the app they developed is a fun riff on the classic Super Mario Brothers game, including original music by one of the team members. This is the second year that Houston High School has had a team to win for our congressional district. So let's have that group of individuals come up first. So the winners of that congressional app challenge are Manis Mala, Ricky Liu, and Milo Solopek. Congratulations. Yes, hold on. I gotta get the right ones. There's Mala, and there's Ricky, and Milo. So who was the original music? Miss Betsy, you want to come out to the side? She's kind of hiding behind the group. Also here tonight, which includes some repeat winners from last year also, is the state finalist team for the Samsung Solve for Tomorrow Challenge. The contest asks students to envision apps that will make the world a better place. The app proposed by this team matches high school students with career pathways and interest inventories to help them plan a better strategy for post-secondary efforts. On behalf of the board, I will call all of these students to be recognized. So the state finalists for the Samsung Solve for Tomorrow Challenge are Nick Annawalt, Lauren Gunter, Jake Manuel, Zach Morris, Kenneth Pratt, Seth Painter, Julia Maxwell, and Pranav Desurkar. If y'all would come on up, please. I can't do all of these. I can just do a couple. So I don't know everybody. Yeah, y'all gotta. So Lauren, you gotta help pass these out. Nick, Jake. Okay, we're gonna have to slide in and do. Come on in, Jake. Congratulations and thank you all. And last but not least, I think what's special to note is that when you have incredible students and they're excited and they're engaged, they win things because of their enthusiasm. But that extends from one individual, and that's Miss Leslie Brommer. Miss Brommer has really grown this program into something special, and you look at the numbers of students that are signing up to take her class and the incredible things that they're doing. I'm excited to see what we're going to add in the future, but Miss Brommer, she's going to be a regular here because of all the incredible things that they're doing. Thank you for what you're doing with our students. So congratulations to Miss Brommer. And so when we talk about excellence always, and we talk about what makes an exceptional school district, it's all those stakeholders. It's those teachers in those classrooms. It's those students who are accomplishing great things. We thank you for representing Germantown schools. And at this time, you are welcome to leave. You do not have to feel obligated to stay for the board meetings. Thank you and congratulations.
Next on the agenda of reports, Chairman's report will be filed with the minutes. Just to note that we've all been very busy over the past month attending a variety of wonderful concerts and programs put on by all of our schools, and congratulations to all of those teachers and administrators, parents who've been so involved in making it happen. Everything has been wonderful, and it's truly made the holiday season special. Beyond that, the report will be filed with the minutes. Next will be our financial report. Mr. Jones.
Okay, we have both the October and November 2018 reports. Just a couple comments on October. To note, in the health insurance fund, claims for medical and pharmacy decreased to $306,000 for the month, which is below our target of $318,000. And the OPEB trust fund, an unrealized loss of $122,000 was reported by U.S. Bank for the month. We did have a small recovery of $27,000 in November to offset this. The OPEB Commission will continue to monitor the trust investment performance and continue to report this to you. On the November 2018 balance sheet, looking at the financial position of the district and the school operating funds, assets, liabilities, and fund balance total $15.2 million. Federal projects, there's an amount due from the Tennessee Department of Education at $349,000. The cafeteria fund, total assets, liabilities, and fund balance at $224,000. Capital projects, assets, liabilities, and fund balance at $1,058,000. And the health insurance fund, assets, liabilities, and fund balance at $2,015,000. The OPEB trust is at $2.2 million, and the general fixed asset account group, which is your plant, property, and equipment, is right at $71.5 million. A couple comments on the school operating fund. Sales tax revenues are up $80,000 compared to the same time last fiscal year. I added the target percentages for you. When you look at expenditures in the school operating fund, so at November, we're at 42% for administrative or support categories, 34% for instructional, and overall our total expenditures are at 30%. And another good trend for the health insurance fund, claims dropped to $297,000 for the month, which again is below our target. Year-to-date claims are averaging $354,000 per month. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Next on our agenda is the superintendent's report.
As we went through in the work session, I would like to review, we're going to do it quicker this time, some of the efforts that we have taken around whole child in our district. So, Mrs. Crowder, if you can pull that up for me. We all know that based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that before any academic learning can occur, students must be provided with a safe and nurturing learning environment. It is my commitment and my staff's to ensure that those needs are being met. Starting this school year, we have made it a priority to analyze all of our efforts around whole child development while taking active steps to increase parent, staff, and student training. I think our goal for today is really highlight all of those different components. And the parable that it reminded me of, there's actually a children's book where it's mice instead of the true Indian parable, but it's 7 blind men who are all touching parts of an elephant. And if you ask them each about the part that they're touching, one of them says, oh, I'm touching a rope. Another one says, oh, I'm touching a spear. Somebody says, oh, I'm touching a wall. They all have a different interpretation because they're only seeing their portion of the whole bigger project. And so that's really one of our goals today, is to talk about and really highlight what each of those different groups of stakeholders are doing in our district around whole child development. So when we look at those stakeholders and we started talking about what each of them are doing, we of course have the No Bullying Task Force that we created, but we also have school counselors that are actively working on whole child development with students, the general public, school administrators, our students themselves in 3rd through 12th grade, the school staff, and of course state, district, and school board leadership. So know that all these groups are actively working around whole child development. So, Mr. Bland, if you want to talk a little bit about the Bullying Task Force, their goals and timeline, and what they've accomplished.
The Bullying Task Force was created in June, and that task force was created with a small group of parents whose children have been experienced firsthand bullying at one of our schools. So we wanted to make sure that we heard their voices and put a representative on the task force. When we met in July, we had we established 3 goals. One of the goals was to create a baseline of data from a student survey that the students took in September. That was one of the goals. Another goal was to discuss anti-bullying curriculum and have a discussion around that and communication, effective communication between parents and schools. We've done that with the Above the Line. We've done it with Second Step, and again, and you'll hear OVS a lot tonight. That's another program and preventative piece of curriculum or program that we'll talk about. And then the reflection and analysis of the first semester action plan. We met in October and we analyzed the data from the student survey, and you'll see more of that in the 3rd meeting that we'll have in February after the box out bullying presentation. This is a sampling of the students who took the survey in September. They had a 2-week window in which to complete it, and this is the cohort of students that we used to use that survey sampling. We met in July, we met in October, and in the September board meeting, we provided you an update with where we were in the process and next steps moving forward. I think I've hit most of that. Task force, yep. Go to the next one. Next one. Okay, we have box out bullying coming in February, and they are a grade appropriate or age appropriate performance team, and they will come into each of our schools. They have 2 performances at Dogwood, 2 at Farmington, 3 at Houston Middle, and 3 at Riverdale. And those dates and that information will be coming out to the community soon. They'll come in and have presentations about anti-bullying preventative measures and what to do if students encounter those actions.
So, like I said, we're going to take each of these groups, and so Mr. Bland was just giving the overview of the goals and timeline for the No Bullying Task Force, and then we're going to start hitting all the other stakeholder groups. So, school counselors. Now, I know that we have multiple schools that are doing incredible things, so I don't want you to think that this is all that we are seeing, because we're seeing it at Farmington and Dogwood, but we're just going to highlight some of those key things that we have in the district. So at Houston Middle School, for example, Ms. Diaz has really made an effort around whole child development. So in the past few years, she was researching schools and different groups that do that. And so they really identified the Ron Clark Academy, which is in Georgia, and she has taken almost her entire staff there to be trained. That academy focuses around student relationships, whole child development, and academic rigor. They developed the house system, and so it reminds me of Harry Potter with the Gryffindor and the Slytherin and all those different groups, and they have competitions that are building points. But more importantly, this is designed around pushing into the classroom, pushing into the academics to really encourage lessons from the school counselors and also encourage that smaller community and those mentoring relationships. And so they do have a system just like the selection where they're all assigned to different houses, but they have embedded character lessons every single Friday during this house system. This is something that is special for what they do in their school. And know that they're really basing it on research and the needs of the kids in the school. Miss Woody and the administrative team, they actually put out a survey in August, helping the students identify things like culture and their needs that they see in the school. Based on those needs, they identified some students that needed extra supports and needed extra help in the district, and they really talked to their mentors about how to provide those extra supports for those students. But know, too, that the incentives, how do you win? They're not playing Quidditch like in Harry Potter to win the awards. It's for acts of kindness. So when they see students that are performing acts of kindness around the campus or who have increased academic rigor in the school district, they're earning points for their different houses, and they have different celebrations for the houses. So they just had one based on the Polar Express where they decorated the cafeteria and hallways and had a celebration for that house that had exhibited the most examples of where they'd really helped other students or increased rigor in the school district. But more importantly, too, that structure allows for the school counselors to have contact and also train the teachers. So, Mr. Hatter, if you want to talk about the lessons.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge a couple counselors along the way. Diana Lang is a new counselor at Houston Middle School, and Carla Christian also works at Houston Middle School. Carla was just recognized as the National School Counselor of the Year. And when I looked at Diane came first-year counselor. She came from us from I think Johns Hopkins University. And when you look at the work that they're doing and you start to ask questions, the first thing they did was they made their own survey at Houston Middle School. And in that survey, they were looking for responses. And the data that they got from these responses was going to drive these lesson plans that you see up there on the screen. And a point of emphasis, when I looked at the survey results, the two highest results out of all the kids' surveys, and this is a compliment, but maybe something we need to, also there may be a backside to this, is study skills and the pressures that they have to make decent grades. So their main focus is how do you make good grades and how do you study? Other categories that they were asked was, do you feel comfortable talking to an adult? Yes, they felt comfortable talking to an adult. Do they feel like they're being bullied? Now, that was a low score of all the data that they collected on, hey, what are the needs of these students? However, it was there. So it is there. I'm not going to skirt around it. But that anxiety that kids are faced with, a counselor said this, I don't know if it was Diane or Carla, that they are so caught up with their grades that in third grade, a 93 is not good enough. So you start to see this trend of this anxious, hurried child. So stay with that along the way. But from these surveys, they then, because I think of the work that the July and the September task force, and looking back to last May, they really put an emphasis on bullying and the difference between bullying and conflict. And along that lesson, when you talk to Diane and you see the lesson plan in its written language, you understand that they really want to impress upon kids, do they have two safe adults that they can talk to? And I thought that was really important that they emphasized to kids, yes, there should be two adults that you can go to if you're under some type of duress. The other topic had to deal with suicide and being aware of suicide prevention and the trigger points and what they look like. And they wanted the kids to identify 4 trigger points that if you had a friend that was under some type of duress. Along the way, though, they provided mechanics to help support these children, these middle school age children. And this took place in September. 2 lessons, one in September, one in October. They have a snap box, if I have that right. And the snap box is a kid can put a note into a counselor, and the counselor sees the note, and then they go and send for that child. And that is a one-to-one responsive service based on the need of the child. When you tie it back into Dinwiddie, Roger Dinwiddie's presentation back in, I think it was August, you start to realize that kids are under so much pressure, especially if you come from a lower socioeconomic class and you don't have the right clothes. You're a target. Especially if you're overweight, you could be a target. And especially if you have a learning disability, if you're an exceptional student, also known as learning disabled, you could be a target. The survey results from the district-wide stated, from what I recall, is that every school really had an environment and a culture of being inclusive. So I thought, wow, that's really powerful. And then you tie it into the Houston Middle School data, and you see that, golly, it's anxious. Kids are anxious about grades and study skills, and are they going to make the right grades to succeed in life? So keep that in mind, but the lessons that these people hit, Diane and Carla, under the direction of Liz Diaz, who actually was a school counselor, you really see that the direct services and the responsive services, I take my hat off to Houston Middle School with these 2 lessons. And they do more and more lessons. They go in and talk about the other categories that they pulled from the data, and they create the lessons based on a student-centered approach. What are the students' needs? What are they saying? And then they come in behind it. And I think they do it every Friday. Don't quote me on that. I think it's really powerful. It's a wonderful practice. It's a local practice, and I get why they have been recognized nationally as a school in the counseling world as being accredited as being one of the best counseling schools, not only in the state but possibly in the country. So, thank you, Mr. Manuel.
So we're going to try to go quickly through it, but we talked about this earlier in the work session, that they're also bringing in national speakers to talk to their staff. And so one individual that came in, Kim Bearden, who's a co-founder of the Ron Clark Academy, actually came in and worked with the counselors and the staff at the school to really work around building those relationships with students. And I'll jump in a little bit on this one. I'm thankful that Mr. Legault and Mr. Taylor are here today. We've talked about the priority of making whole child a focus for the district and how are we really serving students. And they've really tried to be innovative in reaching students. And so I know Mr. Legault really was looking at Future Ready Day and Ms. Fisher and Mr. Taylor about how can we make something that's an ACT test day for seniors more special to get more bang for our buck, more special for students. And so they really developed the Future Ready Day. So I don't know, Ms. Grada, if you want to share.
What's wonderful about Future Ready Day is that it did not just focus on the ACT, but the idea of developing the whole child for the future. And when Rob Legault spoke about this idea, there is an incredible amount of passion between he and the guidance counselors to develop this day in the best interest of our students. So the day broke the students into 2 groups in the 9th grade who were not taking AC test or doing any sort of test prep. And they took time out to pair them up with their homeroom teachers, who they had not gotten to spend a lot of time with up until that point. They brought in community members, including members of the bullying task force showed up, and the members from district office and other community helpers. And we did team building exercises with them as they got to know each other, and it was a wonderful morning. The other half of the 9th grade went into the auditorium, and Sarah Schmidt, their college and career counselor, showed them some of the tools that are available to high school students that they sat down and thought, wow, I wish if we could have done this again, not waiting until junior year to show the children that there's an interest inventory in Naviance or how to use that platform to prepare themselves better to take the ACT. So hats off to the HHS administration. This was a huge feat of thinking outside of the box and a big team effort.
We had met, and when I say we, there was a group of us, some administrators, some school counselors, and we've probably met 3 times over the course of the semester. And what has driven these conversations is one guide from the State Department, and I didn't put it up there, but I'm going to show it to people out in the audience. It is simply called the K-12 Social and Personal Competencies Resource Guide. We call it SEL for short. Social Emotional Learning is what we call it. And what we were trying to figure out is, okay, we're right where we need to be. If not, we're a high achieving district. But from the counselor's world, because of what we're into and because of the current pressures kids are under throughout the state, the question is, well, how do we respond to social emotional learning of students? So back in August, September, that was the guiding question. And so that guiding question now develops into, well, what curriculums do we have in place? So Mr. Bland mentioned, I think, second chance or second step. I always get confused. Second step, and above the line and below the line. I think we inherited those from Shelby County Schools, if not maybe within the first years of what we're doing. So keep that in mind, that this is coming from the state. Last year, 2017, there is an issue that the state realizes, hey, we're not doing enough as a state. So in talking to the counselors is, what can we do to make it better for students? 1 or 2 questions came up throughout that. Is if you look at a student's report card, and I had 2 children, and you would see their conduct as being an ESN or U. And I would ask, what does the E stand for to my son? And he would give some type of response, and I didn't know if he was telling the truth or not. If you have an adolescent son, you never know if they're telling the truth. But from that, the ESNU is, golly, wouldn't it be nice if that was characterized in some type of content where a parent would understand, hey, that this student is really hitting these social emotional competencies. They're socially aware, they're empathetic, they're taking responsibility for their decisions. What does that look like, sound like, and feel like is really what the question was. The second question that came out of that meeting or these meetings is, how do you track a student who may be going through difficult times in elementary school, may be going through difficult times in middle school, and as they transition up, we can follow their transcripts, we can follow their GPA, we can follow their discipline records, but have we been able to follow their social emotional competency and how they've grown? So from that, the counseling working group with some administrator leadership as well, the question really becomes is at the end of the day, I know that a kid is going to get a transcript, it's going to have their GPA, but does it really give a full picture of what this child has developed into becoming? And I'm going to get to that at the end, so I'm kind of setting you up right now, but I want to give you the background of what these groups were working on. Is how do we help kids with their social emotional competencies? Along that way, though, there was also a policy that came down from the state, and if you look at the policy, it is the Teacher Code of Ethics. And that Teacher Code of Ethics, it's responsibilities that teachers have towards their students. Last year, there were 8 little bullets. This year, there's 19. One of them jumped out at me because of my background. Background is leadership and counseling. And the one that really grabbed my attention was simply this. Make reasonable effort to protect the emotional well-being of the student. So I'm starting to connect the social emotional competencies with it is our professional duty to watch out for these children. Miss Tingle is in the audience. She did something that was extremely powerful. She takes, she manages and teaches the alternative school child. And in that process, she invited some of us to have a student present the goodness of what he was working on in that classroom. And you could see the young man's self-esteem and self-efficacy light up. And I thought, wow, what a powerful, wonderful local practice to watch that. Mr. Legault is in the audience, system principal, grabs a team of teachers, and he says, you know, I think it's more about academics. He takes a group of teachers and he has them call parents, simply telling them how wonderful their child is from a social emotional competency perspective. One parent meets him and greets him at the door at the high school and simply says, how wonderful you were to reach out to me and tell me that. So there is some momentum that we're working on to identify some of these competencies, but it is a small positive deviance move that we're trying to make because we value the well-being of students. The one term up here, and I may have Mr. Blaine help me, SCUDA is a measurement tool that the school counselors are using. I have no idea what SCUDA stands for. I do know it is a time management log.
Go ahead,
because
Mr. Blaine.
the state wants us to monitor the time on task that these counselors are doing, so I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Blaine.
So with SCUDA, it was important to recognize that it's a program developed with data-driven program. It's a data-driven program, so the counselors are not just making up things to discuss with the kids. They're using the data that they have based on student needs to develop their counseling curriculum and programs. November, we sent 2 school counselors, Carla Christian and Jonathan Pritchett, to Boston for OVAS training. They are being trained to train others in the district how to implement this program. So we did make a commitment to that to send them there. We're going to have a small group meeting in January to discuss their findings and to determine whether or not it's a program that fits the needs of the district. If it is, then you'll see that roll out shortly afterwards. If it's something that it may not be a fit for the district, we're going to keep looking until we find a program that fits the needs of our district.
And then finally, as we talked about, one of the things that we want to do is work on that vertical alignment. So when we're talking about curriculum that's in the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school, we want to make sure that they really pass that baton of learning from grade level to grade level and talk about what's the correct sequence. And it's going to have to be tailored based on the individual school needs. So if you're talking about a house system like at Houston Middle School of how they're pushing in, or elementary schools where they have it worked into their map schedule, the pacing is going to have to be different based on the grade levels and the different school structures. But that's something that we're moving forward that we're going to develop. And so, remember, we just hit the counselors. We're talking about how each of the stakeholders is involved in this whole child process. So we're moving into the general public. So no, this is the overall timeline that you see that has happened in our district since last spring around whole child and around bullying. And so we're going to hit some of those topics.
I think it's important to note that based on feedback that we received towards the end of last school year, we felt it was important to have a conversation with parents. So we had a bullying forum at Houston Middle School. We were available for however long parents needed us. I think we ended up being there maybe 3 hours. We watched a video about bullying prevention, and we had a conversation about school climate and things to look for in our students that may be going through bullying.
A couple times a year, the schools will bring in experts to talk to the students and parents about cyberbullying and online safety. They'll spend some time with the students during the day and then have a session for the parents. One of the things that kind of came out of one of those meetings was talking to a group of parents. You know, their concerns were is we're foreign to this social media issues because we didn't experience this as kids and can't ask our parents about it. But so what they've done is formed a page where parents can go and ask questions and have a discussion and kind of saying, this is what I'm experiencing, what are y'all experiencing? And they're posting a lot of good articles there to read. So I would encourage everyone to get on it. It is Germantown Parents Tech Talk. Germantown Parent Tech Talk.
In August, we did have the bullying forum in May, but we're not experts, so we decided to bring an expert in. Roger Dinwiddie is the CEO of Stars Nashville, and he is a state trainer. He also presents on a national level. He presents on bullying, preventative measures. He talks about things to look for in students and how to develop the whole child. So we brought him in August. You'll also see him in staff. You'll see him in district and board level, and you will see him in, you won't see him in students, but we did bring him in to speak to the entire district staff, faculty and staff, and he had a parent session after he spoke with district faculty and staff in August as well. And then coming up in February of 2019, we have a parent survey, school climate survey that'll go out to parents that we send out yearly.
And going forward in the future, we shared with the board that we are starting a new strategic plan process, and so this is something that we want to engage the community on. So know that we're going to have several town hall meetings throughout the district at all of the schools. And one of those areas that we know that we need to increase in our strategic plan is around the whole child. When you look at the metrics and really what we're focusing on in the district, we know that's an area of growth that we see that we need to focus on. And so there will be town hall sessions just focusing around whole child, bullying, social emotional learning. That's going to be a focus for us as the district. And so that's going to be rolling out here over the next 6 months.
With the school administrators, and I already made reference to it, at the beginning of the year, we made sure they understood the teacher code of ethics and the GMSD employee responsibilities to students. Along that way, based on their performance evaluations, they are told to consider and to look at the approachability factors of all their teachers and if they are showing empathetic consideration for children. Along that way, I do want to highlight some of the administrators at the elementary level. They're trying to catch student or teachers being kind to kids, and then they turn around and call that parent, and that teacher calls that parent about kindness acts that they're seeing at the elementary level to create a culture of kindness.
State level in September, we sent a small group to hear Roger Dinwiddie speak again in about a similar but different topic in Jackson, Tennessee. So we had school level and district level administrators to attend that. Also in September, we at the principals meeting, we discussed anonymous alerts, how to properly conduct student investigations, and we talked about discipline trends in the district. That's also one way that we can help the whole child, is to determine what discipline trends are going on and address those trends.
One side note, anytime you see TOSS, that's a statewide initiative. So you're seeing the state trying to groom leaders to think a little bit outside the box and not so much academically instructional leadership, but also the non-academic support issue leadership topics that they need to be cognizant of as well.
October was another review of reporting procedures and communications, and this was more of how to communicate with parents in a timely fashion after any reports that we receive, how to conduct investigations when we receive those reports, and we also sent a group of district and school level administrators to hear Chuck Cagle speak in Jackson, Tennessee. He spoke on everything from reporting to civil rights to harassment. He spoke on everything that our school level leaders need to hear so they can properly investigate and report those back to either law enforcement or district level administration. Upcoming principals meeting, the activities that the bullying task force went through in October, we're going to have the principals conduct the same, do the same activities, as well as you'll see a small group of student, it's a student safety task force or committee that we're going to create, and they'll do that same task as well.
And so once again, so now we're moving into our next stakeholder group, and that's the students. So Mr. Grace.
So part of we have introduced a new typing curriculum this year, and so as early as second grade, inside those lessons, we're going to put some digital citizenship lessons. So they meet every 2 weeks in like their MAP schedule, and so for the first 4 lessons, we've included not only typing, but we've also put surfing safety in there, cyber safety, online behavior, and email rules and manners, email rules and manners.
And we've discussed the grade 3 through 12 students who took the survey.
I'm going to skip my October session. You're going to hear more about it at the end. So for the sake of time, I'm going to pass for right now.
The school safety specialist, Mr. Crump, he has started to form this committee, which I just spoke about. We were supposed to start meeting in December, but after conversations, we have decided to open this committee to K-12 students, not only high school, so we're going to push that back to January. They will discuss everything from school safety, climate, culture, and social, emotional issues that they may be having or facing at school. Also, February, we have Box Out Bullying coming. We spoke about that earlier. Those are the age-specific performances that we'll have. We have contracted them to come in to put those performances on at 4 of our 5 schools.
Okay, so now we're looking at our whole school staff and the timeline of what they've been doing around Whole Child. So some of these are repeats because when we bring in national speakers or state speakers, we want to leverage all the stakeholders we can at once. So you'll see a lot of the repetition, but know that they are meeting with different groups when they're coming in and they're scheduled back to back.
So we'll skip August and go to September. September yearly. Faculty and staff are trained on suicide prevention. They're trained on bullying prevention, harassment, and intimidation. That's completed within the first 60 days of school. So that was conducted in September, and that's something that's a mixture of presentation and video training.
And of course, we covered the Future Ready Day and the innovation that they're doing at the high school, but know that the staff were involved in this process also. And of course, at Houston Middle School, we brought in Kim Bearden, the co-founder of Ron Clark Academy.
Again, that's a small teacher group that we will have conduct those same activities that the Bullying Task Force did. So you have teachers, administrators, and board will conduct those activities.
And then moving forward, when we look at this upcoming February, we do have a PD day for staff in February. Know that there will be a social emotional component to that. And so know when we look at Houston Middle School, for example, and talk about the fact that their whole staff was trained by Roger Dimwitty at the beginning of the school year. And then we have our counselors that are doing the training with them in September. And then they bring in Kim Bearden here this semester. And then in February, we're going to do PD training around whole child. We're really trying to reach them consistently, so they're seeing that priority, they're seeing that touch, they're realizing the importance of whole child, and really making sure that we are providing the best environment for students.
So back in May, that's when we extended the invitation for board members to come in to look at the processes we have for investigations, and also look at the discipline, the way we keep and analyze the discipline data. We also spoke about anonymous alerts in our live bullying document that all schools and administrators have, that they report their cases of bullying in that we have access to. I think we've covered most of September. The Safe Schools training, that's a series of videos that we conduct yearly. All faculty and staff have to complete these, and they range anywhere. Topics include OSHA, sexual harassment, bullying, intimidation, cyberbullying, and the list goes on.
And Mr. Hatter, if you'll cover November.
The November group, there's several groups. One was a counseling group, or a couple counseling groups that met along the way first semester. This one in November was unique, and it had to do with optimal performance levels of staff and what takes a staff member from doing their best. And my premise is that teachers or staff members are overextended. So I thought, golly, how are they overextended, and should their primary focus be in the classroom? And if you could free up everything else and get rid of all the peripherals, what would that sound like, look like, and feel like? What I'm really talking about are we being clubbed to death? And are our teachers doing all these clubs outside of the classroom? The answer surprised me. And the answer was one that I thought needs to be given consideration as we roll out the strategic plan and start that process next semester. They said, no, it's not the clubs. Teachers like doing the clubs because you build rapport and relationships with students. It had to deal with the accessibility of the staff, and when can the staff turn off having to respond to emails that are beyond business hours? I thought, wow, what a question, that teachers really want to keep their focus on the child. And what does that look like? Are we being over-emailed to the extreme where teachers don't feel like they're given a break? So that's something that we're going to have to discuss as we move forward. But that November deal really surprised me because of the power of the relationship between the student and the teacher that is non-academic. It's clubs, and they actually enjoy doing the clubs because they get to see the students in a different light.
And then moving forward, when we talk about what's coming this next semester, we do want to have a school board work session just around the whole child, around bullying, around social emotional learning for our board. They can also go through the data that our different groups have looked at, our bullying task force, our teachers, our students, so they can see the data and look at the interpretations that each of the stakeholder groups look at. And then talk about, as we're going through the budget season and strategic planning season, how do we want to grow this? How do we want to increase what we're doing and really improve our practices? And that leads us to next steps. And some of these we've already covered through the timelines that we have here. So when we talk about next steps, we will have our third bullying task force meeting where they're going to look at the curriculum, they're going to look at box out bullying, they're going to talk about the LVS program, and they're going to really help us look from the parents' perspective of how we need to improve our efforts. There will be a parent climate survey that we talked about coming next semester to really see from the parents' perception compared to the students' perception, what are they seeing in the schools. We have the task forces that are going to continue where we're doing surveys, box out bullying presentation, Olveus evaluation, February, of course, we start talking about the budget as the board and positions, programs that we need to improve in the district. And then, of course, March updates, that's when we want to really put a culminating effort around this whole process and talk about what we've learned from each of our stakeholder groups. But future-wise, and I'll pass the baton to Mr. Haddo, we have seen some things. We have seen some improvements, some things that we want to do, and Mr. Haddo has really been looking at some of the data that we've seen and some of the things that we want to increase in our district. Mr. Haddo.
Something that came out this week in the Tennessee Department of Education Counselor's Guide was another printout called the Tennessee Comprehensive School-Based Mental Health Resource Guide. That's where that first bullet is coming from. You tag that along, and I'm on several state committees or just by paying attention to different authors. There is an anxiety problem, and some of that anxiety happens to be a ripple effect because of the high cost of college tuition. I'm on a working group right now. I came in from Nashville, and the guy from one of these universities was telling me that it is because of high cost of tuition. He doesn't blame parents for putting pressures on students that is academically geared because college tuition costs so much. So I get that. I want to make sure that you guys get that. It's unfortunate, though, that the Ohio State University, being a Buckeye, when I was up there, they have to put a net at the bottom of a parking garage because students are under so much anxiety that they're jumping. So if you look at that, hey, wow, we've really created a culture of anxious young people in between the ages of whatever through probably the age of 25. One thing that we also know is this mental health stigma, and I want to go back to Houston Middle School, and it kind of caught my attention. I don't want to call people out, but they identified maybe 15 students, the two counselors there, that really said, hey, that we're really struggling with anxiety. So they wanted to do a working group. Out of the 15 people that they called, adults that they called, 2 of them said, yes, I want you to work with my child. The other 13 did not want to take advantage of that service. If you look at the social media and the national media, I think that it's probably time that this system, the Germantown School District, has an opportunity to get ahead of that stigma attached to people that are really struggling. I'm talking about anxiety and depression and all, and probably the binge drinking and all the other stuff that's out there, but no one really likes to discuss. I do want to mention one more thing. Having students in college or young people in college and being around the college-age kids, if you've noticed, the colleges are trying to get ahead of it. They are now offering 8-week classes that simply deal with, from my understanding, social emotional health. And a lot of it's centered around the hazing in the fraternities. I don't know much about the sororities, but also the binge drinking and the depression and anxiety that kids are under. So pay attention to that, because I think that I'm glad we're having that discussion tonight, and I'm glad the superintendent is making this a high priority.
And then we talked about staffing needs and something that we're going to bring to the district attention. I don't want to steal right now the organic nature of what our administrators, our counselors are trying to build in our school district. I don't want to say, oh, we had this position, we had this position, we had this, and oh, the program's done, we're complete with what we need to do. They're in the process of building this. So I don't want to say these are the numbers and these are the requests that they're going to have. This is just a base, and we talk about what they're going to grow and what they're going to develop. They're in that process right now, and I think when this board gets together and talks in March about how do they see us moving as a district, those are going to be some of the things that we need to discuss through this process. So don't think that this is the end-all, be-all of requests that we think we need in the district. But just based on the funding formula that we look at in our schools, the BEP funding formula, they're really providing the minimal amount, and we are below the minimal amount in some of these areas. So you can see at Dogwood and Farmington, they have a counselor and a half, and so there's actually a counselor who's sitting here right now who actually switches between the two schools, and it's difficult to do that process. So know that that's a challenge for those individuals, but know that we see that because they're part of the MAP schedule, it limits their ability to work one-on-one with individuals or work in those small groups because they're teaching whole group instruction. So when you look at the current ratios at Dogwood and Farmington, for example, 1 to 629 or 1 to 545, if we add one position and so have 2 full-time at Dogwood, 2 full-time at Farmington, that gets us more in line to what the state had planned through the BEP formula. And when you look at Riverdale, for example, K-5, they're at 1 to 455. At 6-8, they're at a ratio of 1 to 560. 115. All of the red are areas that are still above what the state would recommend from the BEP funding. So this is something that we would recommend. When we look at Houston Middle School, for example, they're at a ratio of 1 to 478. If we add a counselor there, you can see it drops us to that BEP numbers. And if this is going to be a focus for the district, this is something that we think that we need to move forward and address. No, too. We talked earlier in the work session that even at the counselors at the high school, even though we're closer to the ratios, what they do is not real counseling. And that doesn't diminish that they're working hard every single day, but they're really academic counselors. They're working with students' grades. They're working with graduation requirements. They don't get a lot of time, and we do have a counselor, a social worker there who's working with students in need, but know that because of their schedules and the busyness of what they do, they don't have time to focus on the true social emotional learning at the high school. So that's an area that we want to address. And of course, the district-wide social worker, if we add one, that would get us to the ratio that the BEP suggests with a 3 to 6,000 ratio. So, Mr. Haddo?
With that in mind, I think that the counselors, when you talk to them anecdotally, they really want to do one-on-one responsive services or small group direct services. Right now, they're being pulled into classrooms, which isn't a bad thing. Whole group instruction is not bad. However, I think that the power is in the relationship, especially through K through 12. But in particular with the elementary school counselor. So we're really trying to free up the elementary school counselor as well as trying to provide additional support for the administrators. So you see the administrator in training, that would be a teacher that has an administrative license and they're just waiting for their shot. And what we're finding is that with RTI and the pressures of RTI as well as 504s and IEPs, that administrators are oftentimes in these one-to-one meetings, and they have to be, and it's important, don't take me wrong. However, if you could free them up so they could be in classrooms and see more students or out in the hallway and see more students, that would be a benefit. This administrator in training, though, would also be someone that, wow, what a great succession plan into the world of school leadership. So that's where that's coming from. One thing that I referred to, it was back in October, and I'd like to thank Mr. Rob Taylor, the principal at Houston High School, and Mr. Emanuel for allowing me to do this. But it really stemmed from, what is this thing called Naviance? And so Naviance is a high school platform, 9 through 12, that is right there. And there was one tab in particular that got my attention, and it was called Who Am I? And if you look at that tab, and parents, I think you have access to this, but don't quote me on this, you should have access to it, and I'm not sure if you do or you don't. But in that Who Am I, there's a Strength Finders assessment, which comes from Gallup. A lot of the adults in the work world have taken the Strength Finders assessment. Well, students can take it, and in it you find their strength themes, and their strength themes are non-academic. These are their strengths. I recruited 5 students from Houston High School. Some of them I knew. Others I saw, and I saw how they interacted with adults, and one I met in a special ed class, and that young man changed my life because he did not ask anything about academics. He simply asked an empathetic question. He wanted to know more about me. And I thought, wow, he's not even into titles. He's just trying to figure out, what am I doing in here? And from that, we made this small group, and the small group took their own Strength Finders assessment, and they had to tell the other student how to take it and how to find it. So I was trying to build some teamwork along the way. But along that way, and I didn't have time on this, there's also a SQR3, which is a study skills method, that if you teach kids a study skills method along with their Strength Finders assessment, and the two go hand in hand, wow, you really have now connected some dots. You've made it academic, but it's tied about them, so they're interested in it. But in that Strength Finders assessment, it tells them their strength themes, and I think there's 36 different strength themes that someone can have. Mine happens to be connectivity and learning, but some of theirs were competitive, futuristic thinking, relational, empathy, everything that you'd want to see in a kid, but you may not even realize as a parent that your kid has that because you're not aware that that tool exists. So it became kind of a 5-session, 25-minute pull-out group. And at the end of the group, it was, hey, how can you make a project as a group based on your strengths? And so now you have Strength Finders, which is a 1-to-1 level, to a study skills opportunity, to a project with 5 individuals that may or may not have known each other at the start of this. And I had to stop. 2 of them said, hey, Mr. Haddow, we want to continue. And I thought, wow, what a powerful testimony. They wanted to continue because an adult spent time with them to identify something with them that was non-academic. And the power was in the synergy of the group. Now, I'm not saying that all the groups are going to be successful. If I were to play it forward, I was going to have all those group members identify one of their friends to join in on the next session while they worked on their own individual project. And so that project was going to be a community builder. So that Strength Finders, there's also a career assessment on that of who am I? Well, the career assessment is going to tell you your career. However, it may not tell you your needs. And if you know today's world, careers change, and it depends on what the economic condition is of the country that may decide what you're going to decide to get into. So if you tie in the Strength Finders into the careers, and if you tie in the careers into colleges, and colleges that offer subject matters that support their career focus and their Strength Finders focus, what a wonderful deal. More importantly, though, is when that student goes and has to interview, or when that student goes and tries to get the college scholarship, I'd like to think that they can talk about their strengths just as comfortably as they can talk about their academics. And I think that that would be a really powerful interview, especially if they align it with a project that meant something, that had value to them, that they created. So that's where that is coming from. The last bullet, and this is all timing. Remember, my strength theme is connectivity. Citizenship and deliberation. What does that look like, sound like, and feel like? I think the Kettering.org, Kettering outside of Dayton, Ohio, is a nonprofit that is very similar to the Gates Foundation. They're trying to figure out how do you keep democracy alive, and how do people have civil conversations with one another. So that citizenship and deliberation would be more of a group setting, class setting of, hey, what does this look like, sound like, and feel like? And if the teacher or if the leader or the facilitator could tie in their strengths, pick a topic that is out there that needs to be deliberated because it's not going away, topics that these kids are going to inherit from us as adults, and then channel that into citizenship and taking the side of the other and being able to negotiate and trade off. Wow, you may have a powerful, powerful program there at Houston High School that really, I think, has some potential.
So going forward, next steps, I know this was a lot of time, but I do think it's important for our community to know that this is a priority for us. This is something that all of our staff members, our students, our parents are working towards, that we're trying to accomplish to make sure that we are serving the whole child. Hopefully you've seen a snapshot of what the different stakeholders are accomplishing around social emotional learning. I know we didn't highlight all the schools' efforts around these initiatives, but I look forward to sharing some of their work in our upcoming sessions because they are all doing great work, and we just highlighted a few of them. I'm thankful for our staff's calling to serve children in our community. We have caring and kind teachers and staff in this district, and they're here to serve children. They're here because it is a true calling. And I'm excited about what's going to happen in the future. I don't want you to think that we're ever content with where we are. We always want to improve and get better in our district. And so, no, hopefully you've got a greater idea of what we are accomplishing around whole child and social emotional learning. Thank you. I know that was a long report.
Thank you, Superintendent Manuel. Thank you, Mr. Hadow, Mr. Grace, Mr. Bland, and to everyone on the district staff who contributed to this report. I think the information is exceedingly valuable, not just to the board, but to the entire community. So on behalf of the board, thank you for all of your hard work, and most of all for caring as much as you do about our children. Next on the agenda would be citizens to be heard. If there is anyone in our audience who wishes to speak before the board, if you would please make sure you've handed in your citizens to be heard document to Ms. Subramani before the end of the chair's presentation of the rules. GMSD, by its policy, allows persons to address the board during the citizens to be heard section of its agenda, but only within certain guidelines. Tennessee law makes no specific provisions for the participation of the public at school board meetings. Thus, there is no inherent or legal right of citizens to make comments during a school board meeting. Prior to making your remarks, you must state your name, address, and the subject of your presentation. The chair would remind you that if there are several persons who are intended to express the same sentiment, GMSD board rules require that you designate one spokesperson to speak for your position. If you do not do so, the chair determines the comments made are cumulative, the chair may direct the speaker to cease their remarks. Individuals addressing the board shall address their remarks to the chair. Speakers will not be permitted to engage in gossip, make defamatory remarks or comments, and use abusive or vulgar language. In accordance with GMSD policy SB 1.404, remarks will be limited to 3 minutes unless time is extended by the board or otherwise reduced by the chair to reflect the number of citizens to be heard. TCA 39-17-306 provides that it is a Class B misdemeanor to intentionally prevent or disturb a school board meeting. Please be advised that any individual who is disruptive or does not adhere to the aforementioned rules will not be permitted to continue or to make their remarks at this meeting. This evening, we have 2 individuals that have indicated their desire to address the board. You will each be allowed 3 minutes to present your remarks. First this evening to speak before the board is Natalie Williams. Ms. Williams.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Landers, for the opportunity to speak. I am a teacher of first grade students, and it is December, and I am tired. So I will definitely adhere to 3 minutes. I am here tonight to talk to you all about, or follow up on an email that I sent each of you. And for those of you who responded and took the time to reach out, I appreciate that very much. Regarding the transfer policy for Germantown residents. And I know tonight is the second reading, and there could be some changes to what we initially put in place as a board back when we started in 2013. And the original intent of that policy was to allow parents a choice in the best educational environment for their child. And I know that that's something that we all want for our children. That's something that private school parents want for their children. I teach at a private school, and we work with students that are severely dyslexic. And without our environment, without that choice, we would not have the ability to change the academic trajectory for a child. And when you have seen that happen to a child, you are passionate about ensuring that for every single student. So I'm here to ask you tonight to allow Germantown residents to continue to have that choice as to what is the best school, kindergarten through 8th grade, for their child. I believe that the superintendent has spoken to this on several occasions very well and very eloquently. With every enrollment update, he talks about how the number of students that want to shift within our 3 elementary environments kind of balances out. And there hasn't really been a need to rescind any of these transfers. Another word that the superintendent speaks of a lot is the word stability. When we started our district and we put this policy in place, we wanted stability for our families. We wanted stability for these students. I know that that's one of the things that this policy alludes to. I know that the superintendent alluded to stability in his contract negotiation back in June, how important that is for his staff and his teachers. And I agree with him, and I applaud the board for extending his contract. I think it was the right choice. I think what weighs heavily on a board member is when you make a choice in a policy, what is the academic impact on a child and what is the fiscal impact on the budget? Does leaving the opportunity for this child maximize their academic impact and change their trajectory? Does it affect the fiscal budget? I think if you weigh those 2 things heavily, you will have your right decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Our next speaker is John Ulicke. Mr. Ulicke, if you would state your name and address for the record.
John Ulicky, 1792 Wellesley Drive, 38139. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak here this evening. I wanted to speak about my concern about good leadership. I would like to commend this district on its good leadership and the things that I'm hearing tonight. This is the first school board meeting I've attended, and I'm very impressed. I'm very impressed with Mr. Hadow because my family has some connection with some of the students that he is teaching, and so I've heard a little bit about him. And the reason I'm concerned here tonight is that this board is going to make a very important decision on choosing a new chair. As a successful business person, managing people for over 40 years, I look back at what I did well and what I didn't do well and look at other successful businesses. And I think it's really important as we choose someone tonight to lead this board and this district that we take into consideration things such as their trustworthiness, their ability to relate well with all of the interested parties that they work with, their experience in management, because that's important. But it's also some of the things that Mr. Hadow was talking about here, the strengths, to try and draw out strengths to be able to work with coaching Mr. Manuel and helping the group as a whole to be better and live up to their potential. This city is divided. We had a very divisive election. We need to set that aside. We need to move forward. We need to build unity. We need to heal. And choosing someone based on the right qualifications and not on political considerations is very important to go forward, because that sends a message to the community and to the administration and to the teachers and to the students and the parents. So I want to say keep up the good work and think long and hard about who you nominate and who you vote for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ulicky. Thank you to Mr. Ulicky and Ms. Williams both for your comments. Our next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Please note for the public that school policy, the policy 6.206 has been moved to the part of the agenda known as board action items. Ms. Subramani, will you please take the roll?
Ms. Luter?
Yes.
Ms. Griffith?
Yes.
Ms. Hoff?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Chairman Landers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Brings us to our action items for this evening's meeting. First on the agenda is purchase of the HVAC equipment for Riverdale Boiler Chiller Renovation Project. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the proposal from Train through U.S. Communities in the amount of $480,880 for the purchase of HVAC equipment for the Riverdale Boiler Chiller Renovation Project.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded to approve the proposal from TRAN through U.S. Communities in the amount of $480,880 for the purchase of HVAC equipment for the Riverdale Boiler Chiller Renovation Project. Is there any discussion? Questions?
I would like to comment, if that's okay. Just for clarification for the public, know that this is our first step in something that is identified on our capital improvement plan, and that's to remove the old boiler chiller system from Riverdale and to use HVAC units. And so the district would be purchasing these units, and then we would put out to bid for the contractor to install these along with ceiling tile and grid LED lighting to really redo the older building at Riverdale.
Seeing no discussion, Ms. Subramani, will you please call a vote?
Ms. Griffith?
Yes.
Ms. Hoff?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Luter?
Yes.
Chairman Landers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next for our consideration is the Germantown Board of Education legislative agenda proposed for 2019. Several amendments were made at the work session. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the 2019 Germantown Board of Education legislative agenda as amended.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded to approve the 2019 Germantown Board of Education legislative agenda as amended. Is there discussion?
Madam Chair, I would like to just say this document we discussed at the work session, and we also acknowledge that this could potentially be a living document that we make some changes to as we see the state legislators focus on certain areas that we may not be aware of at this time. So this is our initial run at this, but we may be adjusting it in the future as we see need.
Thank you, Ms. Ove. Anything else? Ms. Subramani?
Ms. Ove?
Yes.
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Luter?
Yes.
Ms. Griffith?
Yes.
Chairman Landers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next item for consideration will be policy 6.206, transfers within the district. The chair will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the following policies. SP 6.206, transfers within the system, and SP 6.2061, interdistrict open enrollment.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. However, policy SP 6.2061 was approved in the consent agenda. The motion has been made and seconded to approve the policy SP 6.206, transfers within the system. Is there discussion? Mr. Emanuel, would you like to make your...
Yes, I think one of the things that I would like to reiterate, like Ms. Williams so aptly put, is we don't want to overturn the apple cart if at all possible. We want to provide students that stability to stay in those schools if possible. But know that the changes that we're recommending in the policy are removing the language about exit year, but that doesn't mean that we're blanket going to say that all students have to return to their zone school. That just means they all have to reapply, and that the Student Services Department and the administrative team are going to look at our ability to accommodate those students. It makes more sense at some schools. It could be available at others, different grade bands. It's different based on the capacity when we look at that. Historically, there has been a balance, but we have seen a shift in the past really year and a half, especially with our special needs students, specifically at Farmington, for example, where we've seen some changes that not only change our ability to accommodate transfers, intra-district transfers, it also changes the capacity of the school. Because as we need more classrooms for occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech classes, those classrooms are not available for the general instruction of the school. So know that there are some changes in our capacity specifically at Farmington. But I would like to go through some of the numbers just so the public can see what we have been analyzing and why we're saying we need to modify that policy to give us the time. So based on the new registration, the new enrollment in the spring when we have parents and students sign up for their schools so we know the numbers and we can predict some of the growth, then we can make those decisions based on grade bands. Now, I'm starting with one that kind of fools you, because when you look at Dogwood and the changes based on the zoning, it's a little easier. They've got a little more flexibility compared to some of the other schools. The pie chart that you see right there really shows the analysis that we do when we talk about how do we analyze optimal and maximum capacities at the schools. So we try to protect those spaces at the school that we need for special services. So There are 3 rooms saved there for musics, arts, and they do a music and art hybrid where somebody comes in and they're part-time positions. We try to save one for guidance, for RTI, for ELL, one for a workroom, one for preschool, one for OT, PT, and speech, which isn't optimal. They're using a half room and you have multiple people providing services out of the same room. But based on that, that leaves 37 regular education classrooms in the facility. And based on our new numbers, where you can see the 1920 projected sections in the bottom chart, see where it shows just on zoned residents at Dogwood, you would have 707 students, and you would have 35 sections based on the BEP numbers that we look at. So know that based on that, there would be 2 available classrooms at Dogwood Elementary School. So the board had asked for us to do an analysis, and that's the yellow to say, what happens if we granted all of the intra-district transfers? What would that look like at each of our schools? And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So the yellow is that prediction. So if we allowed the people who are currently on intra-district transfers to stay at Dogwood, what you would see is in the yellow there. Now, know that kindergarten is a projection. We don't know those numbers yet. Those students haven't come yet. So we always put a guess on the kindergarten. Every other number is a real number, but it's rolled up. So the first graders you see right there are the existing resident kindergartners at that school that have all been rolled up. But allowing the changes at Dogwood, it would actually, you'd see a decrease in students. They'd go from 113 to 111, 95. There would be an increase to 98 in second. I won't go through all the grade bands, but there isn't a dramatic change at Dogwood in the numbers. You would go from 707 students to 690 students, 35 sections if you allowed the existing transfers to stay. But Dogwood isn't the challenge here when we look at this policy and look at the numbers. You can see the chart in the upper left is the grade band distribution. Know that we are funded teachers and we have to have a certain teacher-student ratio. So you see those numbers. So when we talk K3, we're talking about a 1 to 20 average ratio. When we're talking 4 through 6, that's a 1 to 25 average ratio. So when you see those numbers, if we allowed the inter-district transfers, it would move our numbers down. Our ratios actually get better at Dogwood. We go from a 1 to 19 ratio to a 1 to 18.72. When we look at 4th through 5th grade, they go from a 23.2 to a 22.2. So know that Dogwood doesn't see an issue with allowing those students there because their students are going elsewhere. But when we move to Farmington, that's when we start having some issues that we've seen the changes. So when we look at the projected numbers of students, and this is what we looked at during the enrollment activities. That's the top 2 lines in that chart. So we would have 124 kindergartner or first graders, 102 second, 99 third graders, 113 fourth graders, 119 fifth graders. And you can see the projected teachers or projected sections that we would need for that, which is 35. When we look at Farmington, we already see that there's an issue because our special ed population has grown into the regular education classrooms at Farmington. So know that if we save 8 classroom spaces for exceptional student education, 2 for preschool, 3 for MAPS, 1 for ELL, and we have 32 classrooms, well, this shows that we would need 35. We're actually 3 classroom spaces short just starting off the bat. Now, this is removing modulars and portables, and know that we have 10 of those at Farmington. So taking those off the books, you lose classroom spaces. That's why we have an issue here. Now, we have a plan to accommodate this. We've looked at some spaces that they're currently using for a health room that we could use, do speech out of. We've looked at some other spaces, so we can accommodate those through this plan, but know that we aren't flush with space based on those numbers. This becomes a lot more difficult when we look at the intra-district transfers. If we allowed the intra-district to stay, we see some large increases. I think it's over 60 kids at Farmington when we talk about those numbers of students coming. So look at 3rd grade, for example, is the ones we've highlighted. Excuse me. We would go from 99 students in 3rd grade to 152 students there in that grade band. To accommodate that, if we left the same number of teachers based on the BEP projection, we go to a ratio of 1 to 30.4 in a 3rd grade classroom. That would be a challenge, and it's not allowable anyway. So we would have to increase the number of teachers there. When we look at their 5th grade section, they would go to a 1 to 27.4 ratio. So just to accommodate these, we would need 3 additional teachers at Farmington. And so you can see in the upper chart on the left what it would do to our grade bands. Now, that's a little closer because you have some lower grade bands in kindergarten, first, and second. So know that you go to a 1 to 20.56 ratio in K3 and a 1 to 23.9 in 4th through 5th. So know there's a little more leeway there, but in the individual grade bands, you start having some challenges. Now, I do want to highlight, though, and we don't want to have a difficult transition. So especially if we're talking about students with special needs or that are in a program and are successful, we have to look at those on a case-by-case basis and know that some of those are going to be granted because it doesn't make sense, for example, with a functional skills student that has an issue with transition, that we would move them for 1 year away from a school then to go to Houston Middle School, for example. So we have to look at each of those cases in isolation. But know that just blanket-wise, we can't grant this. Now, the board can choose to do this. This is doable. But know that it comes with a cost. You would have to pay for the additional teachers, and you'd have to leave the modular classrooms at Farmington. So that's really the decision that the board would have to make is if they choose to do this, there is an impact on can we get rid of modulars? Would we have to add additional teaching staff at the school? So there are some challenges that come with a blanket adoption of all intra-district transfers.
May I add that on the students with intra-district, the numbers that appear on the slide
Oh, they didn't add up the 690, yes.
It's really 753.
Yes, so that student with intra, the total. But it was over 60 intra-district students. The individual grade bands are correct. Yeah, know that we did all this today. So when we look at the other challenges that we face, Riverdale has a little more flexibility. Now know that we are right-sizing. There's a large number of non-residents at Riverdale that through this, the policy that was passed, they would have to reapply, and we're going to have to look at those on a case-by-case grade band. But Riverdale, they really are doing a great job of making do with what they have, and they're using spaces that really aren't designed for instruction. I really applaud Mr. Bond for what they're doing there to try to accommodate students, but that's not where we want to stay with utilization of spaces. So we can't really throw up a chart or a pie chart that shows all the strange spaces they're using, but know some things that are concerns for us. The STEM lab that we built there is used for a regular teaching classroom right now, so the access to that STEM lab is limited. So know that they're making do, and they have special groups teaching out of several classrooms. It really is a challenge at Riverdale. But know that, once again, you don't see dramatic changes there. You go from 1185 to 1199. Number of teacher sections stay the same. Know that this is something that we got to talk about, too. Middle school is completely different than the elementary school. We don't have increased capacity at the middle school level. The increased capacity that we've created is with the new elementary school. So for us, we are seriously looking at all middle school students, and we can accommodate allowing all the intra-district transfers between Houston Middle School and Riverdale, for example, to continue. That is not an issue at the middle school level because we haven't increased anything there. You still have the same brick and mortar. You still have the same number of spaces. We're just shuffling students between the two schools. So in that case, the Student Services Department could accommodate more middle schools, but that's, once again, something we have to look at a case-by-case basis when we look at their capacity at Riverdale. And then to look at Houston Middle School, we already talked about it. It's pretty even. You're talking about going from 989 students to 981 students. The sections stay the same. There's more ability to accommodate. Now, to be aware, we don't fit at Houston Middle School at all. So we're already over capacity. 8 students doesn't make that difference, and that's something that this board has addressed, that we need to get out of teaching out of the science labs there. We need more gym space at that school. So the assumption is that we are moving forward with that expansion project at Houston Middle School to accommodate the number of students that they currently have. But the transfer students don't impact that. They're still over either way. And when we look at our new Forest Hill Elementary, we do see some dramatic changes, and there's a discussion of equity in this process too that I think we need to talk about. When we look at those students that would be staying who are currently on transfers to other schools who are now rezoned to Forest Hill Elementary, it dramatically changes 2 of your grade bands. It changes 5th grade from 54 students to 48 students, 3rd grade from 83 to 74. We would have to drop those numbers of teacher sections there from 4 to 2, so you would have a 2-man team teaching the 5th grade at the new elementary school, which may not be the best. It's doable, but know that not taking into account any residents or non-resident transfers, this would be the numbers that we're looking at. So know here that for us, overall, we talked about 3 teachers being added at Farmington, and we would be reducing 2 teachers here. So that's a 1 teacher cost that we would be adding to this whole plan if you blanket added or allowed all intra-district transfers. And then, of course, we have the cost of the modulars. That's about $100,000 a year approximately. So that would continue at that school. So that would be something that the board would have to take into consideration. And I think also there's a concern of equity. If someone who's on an intra-district transfer, and I gave the example of 2 families are at Dogwood, they live on the same street, and one of them has a transfer to Farmington, and one of them has stayed there at Dogwood. Both of them are rezoned to Forest Hill Elementary. The one who's on transfer is allowed to stay at Farmington, but the one who is at Dogwood is forced to, not forced, we hope they choose to go, but they have to go to the new school because of the new zoning. That's a concern about, is that fair just because that family already has that pre-existing transfer that they're not involved in the zoning process? All those are considerations that I think the board has to take into consideration, and I hope that we have provided you the information that you need to help make your decision on inter-district transfers. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Superintendent, so really what we're saying is Farmington is the school that this would be the most problematic at. And to solve that, we would have to keep portables.
Yes, ma'am. And also Forest Hill is problematic too. So when you talk about lower numbers of students, now, once again, you'd have to talk about transfer students, but that becomes a problem for the new elementary school also.
And what you've said is that we are not eliminating all transfers.
No, I think our goal, like we've always said, is to honor all those transfers, but we have to take it as a grade band by grade band. We have to look at it group by group. It would be my recommendation not to do a blanket just adoption of all inter-district transfers.
And you will also be looking at our functional skills students case by case before decisions are made.
Yes, all special needs students.
Other questions or discussion? Ms. Griffith?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Landers. Talking about the equality, if you will, I think you just sort of referenced, I do still feel that the current transfers, that word everybody likes to use, grandfathering, I think that that's something really important just from how we all began and where we all got to this point. Do we need to change the policy moving forward? Absolutely, I would agree with that. I think we can see, based on these breakouts, we don't really have another option. And I think that as we continue to grow and spread our wings at all the schools, that that will be really important that we do that annually rather than the exit year terminology that has currently existed. That said, I do think that it is still very important that we do our absolute best to honor those families that have been affected and that are currently holding on to those pieces of paper that say, this is how long you get to do this. Those do exist, and we do see, and I appreciate the information. I think almost all of us sitting up here requested the breakout so that we could best understand. And we also all were privy to the fact that in order to add that capacity at the Farmington Elementary School level, that those portables that everybody is really, really wanting to get rid of may be the only way that we can continue to have classroom space that to accommodate some of these requests. I think that it's really important that everybody brought up and mentioned that there are some mitigating circumstances with special education students. And I take that very seriously. The last thing I want to do is be part of disrupting anybody's environment, that is very important to their stability. I like the word a lot too, and it can be used in a lot of ways. I'm just trying to figure out what options may not have been exhausted that we might have considered. You know, we just went through the zoning process, and based on what we see, even with all the rezoning, we still have a couple of schools that are really, really, really full. So I'm not sure, and the last thing I also want to do is participate in a rezoning on a regular basis. So I'd just like to make sure that we're all looking at it from all the points that you made, which I appreciate. Again, you literally hit on everything that has been a concern to me in your comments just a moment ago. I'm just not sure I have all the information that allows me to understand why we can't make that change of the verbiage moving forward and yet still allow these people to keep their existing transfers.
Sure. I think the answer is if you could go to the Farmington slide. It really boils down to that space concern, that if we allowed the 60 students who are on transfer, all of the 60 students on transfer at Farmington, you see some dramatic issues. One of those being that we don't have the classroom space. That would require 3 additional classrooms that we don't have on the footprint of the school. And the other is you create some grade band issues, especially when you look at 3rd grade and 5th grade. So that would be, that's the concern.
Those are the 2 glaring
Yes.
examples, certainly.
Chairman Landers, I have a question. When you said $100,000 for the portables, or for the, excuse me, modular classrooms, that would be a recurring cost until such time as our numbers decrease, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Those are being leased right now because we knew
Correct.
as a board originally that our goal was to remove those within a 5-year period, and so we are leasing those right now at that cost of approximately $100,000.
$100,000 per classroom or per
It's for the bank,
for the
I
entire
believe.
bank?
That's for that bank.
Okay. Something that caught my eye as I was reviewing the policy this past weekend, and I'd like to draw your attention to it. On page 2 of 6.206, lines the end of 19, then 20 and 21, it says, "The superintendent has the authority to rescind or modify a transfer for reasons other than those listed above." I think that speaks to what has been said previously. I think what that says is, when you see these issues, the power needs to lie with the superintendent and the Department of Student Services to make those tough decisions. And I just think, honestly, that the changing of the wording we currently have is clarifying that for everyone. Those are important words. The superintendent has the authority to rescind or modify a transfer for reasons other than those listed above. So I think as we look at your comments regarding exceptional students, your comments regarding the desire for stability for students, but the recognition that we have to serve not just the 140 students that are on intra-district transfer, but we have to serve the nearly 6,000 students that we have equitably. I think we need to support the changes that are presented.
Other discussion?
Madam Chair? As one of the last original board members, I know you don't want to hear history, but from day one, we knew that we would have to build an elementary school. We knew that we would be overcrowded. And we began that with eliminating the portables at Riverdale that had been there for years. And the other thing that we wanted to do was to decrease the class size below the state maximum, 2 students below the state maximum. And now we do have some fresh faces on our board, and maybe our board wants to change a direction. But those have been our goals from the beginning. And we are finally at that point where we can eliminate our portables, have our students all in a safe environment and secure. You know, policies change. They change because the community changes, the number of students change. As board members, we have to reflect those changes in our policies as we move along. I do sympathize with parents. I don't think moving children, you know, to a new school is easy. I think, though, that if the district can especially look at functional skills students and those needs, I think that would be appropriate. But I would say I do have to support the change in the policy.
Any other discussion or comment? Ms. Griffith?
Based on the current verbiage, the time period, I think the open enrollment, 30 days, the time period for folks that may have, and again, I'm just speaking to current transfer families, or on to that topic. I know that it takes a lot of times, usually to the end of the spring, to know where we stand, where we feel like we're going to be with registrations and things like that moving ahead. But to have the ability to get that information about is your request granted or not in a timely fashion, that way if a family chooses to make an alternative decision, we certainly hope that they don't. But if they do, so that they have that ability to do that. And I realize that that window is tiny, but I think that it's important that we're mindful of that if we're going to go on an annual kind of reapply process.
Well, I think usually, Chauncey, what's your usual turnaround time?
We like to notify our parents about March 15th. Okay. It's usually between the 1st and the 15th. March 1st through 15th will be the time frame that we like to notify parents, closer to the 1st if possible. And then the dates that we are currently considering are January, I think 28th through February 9th for the 2-week open enrollment window. But I was kind of...
I'm sorry, yes, I was referring to the actual notification.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
So those are that will be the window for the open enrollment, and all parents will be notified of yay or nay by March 15th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bland. Is there further discussion?
The only other thing that I see in here is when we list enrollment priorities, we have, the GMSD employees' children, and then students currently enrolled in that school. And if you go back up to line 3 on that page, if there are more applicants than seats available, the seats will be awarded through a lottery format. I think because I'm hearing you say that seats will be awarded first to students with a special need or a concern that is a known concern that would be perhaps an IEP, or that perhaps we need to add that in to our list of enrollment priorities before we get to a lottery system.
We can, and for us, when we talk about the programmatic issues, so we assume that's included in that, and also what Ms. Oaf was talking about as far as the superintendent's ability to look at other reasons besides those listed here. We consider those. We wouldn't be opposed to listing special education, but once again, that's hard to do a blanket statement because not all special education students will be granted. It's just that we look at those on a case-by-case basis. But yes, we try to accommodate those through those 2 lines.
Any other questions or discussion? Are you ready for the vote? Ms. Subramani?
Ms. Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Luter?
Yes.
Ms. Griffith?
Yes.
Ms. Oaf?
Yes.
Chairman Landers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next order of business will be the election of a new chairman to serve in the coming year. The floor is now open for nomination.
I nominate Rebecca Luter for chairman.
I'll second, even though I don't think we need a second for a nomination.
According to Robert's Rules of Order, you do not need a second, but thank you, Ms. Fisher. Rebecca Luter has been nominated to serve as chairman for the Germantown Board of Education.
May I speak to my nomination, please?
Of course.
With her skills, her experience, her education, her demeanor, I feel, like Mr. Ulicki said, she meets the criteria of being trustworthy, familiar with management, with an ability to coach, having experience, and an ability to build unity. So I am pleased to nominate her as we enter a year of strategic planning, of new school openings, and of new and other challenges that are bound to happen with our growing district.
Any other comments? Ms. Subramani?
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Ms. Oaf,
Yes.
Ms. Fisher,
Yes.
Ms. Luter,
Yes.
Chairman Landers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next will be the election of the vice chairman. The floor is open for nomination.
I would like to nominate Amy Oaf.
The name of Amy Oaf has been placed in nomination. Are there further nominations? If there are none, Ms. Luter, do you wish to speak to your nomination?
Thank you, Chairman Landers. In choosing to nominate Amy Oaf, I recognize her skill and ability in knowledge of education, which is one of the places that I have a lack. And so forming a team and a person with whom I can consult is very important. And I appreciate her service on the school board in the past and her experience here, and plan to draw on those skills.
Ms. Subramani?
Ms. Luter,
Yes.
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Ms. Oaf,
Yes.
Ms. Fisher,
Yes.
Chairman Landers.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is the election of Tennessee Legislative Network representative. The floor is open for nomination.
I'd like to nominate Angela Griffith.
The name of Angela Griffith has been placed in nomination. Are there further nominations? Seeing none, Ms. Oaf, would you like to speak to your nomination?
Yes, thank you. Angela's background and her ability to network is second to none. As I've gotten to know her in the past few weeks and actually over the past year, I am impressed with her intelligence, her quick ability to learn, and her ability to work with others from a vast ranging perspective. I look forward to seeing what she does as a TLN rep. I think she can bring a whole new set of energy to it, and I'm excited to see that happen.
With that, Ms. Subramani?
Ms. Fisher,
Yes.
Ms. Luter,
Yes.
Ms. Griffith,
Yes.
Ms. Oaf,
Yes.
Chairman Landers.
Yes.
Thank you.
That concludes the business of the board. The announcements are as follows. The last day of school for winter break is tomorrow, Wednesday, December the 19th. Students return after winter break on Thursday, January the 3rd. The 2019 legislative breakfast is scheduled for Friday, January the 4th from 9 to 10 a.m. at Arlington Community Schools Administration Building. And our next board meeting is Tuesday, January the 15th here at City Hall. With that, the board wishes you all a happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, and the meeting stands adjourned. Thank you for your attendance.